Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly, very quietly, into one of history's most polite battlegrounds. Victorian marriage. Not the sweeping romantic drama kind, not the Hollywood ballrooms and slow-motion waltzes. I mean the real thing, where courtship was less about butterflies and more about references, posture, financial stability, and whether your embroidery suggested you'd be a reliable wife employee for life. Because in the 1800s, falling in love wasn't the fairy tale moment. It was basically the HR screening. Marriage? That was the job offer. Your honeymoon? Employee onboarding. The in-laws? Let's just call them upper management. So before you settle in, go ahead and tap like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy these slow drip history stories designed to help you drift off. No pressure. This isn't Victorian society. No one's evaluating your worth based on your click etiquette. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. And if it's around 2 a.m., well, that seems to be the universal hour for lying awake thinking, wait, marriage used to be a job interview? Now dim those lights. Take a breath. Maybe grab a blanket that feels slightly too heavy for historical accuracy. Adjust your pillow like it's a delicate Victorian hairpiece. Get comfortable and tuck your feet in, not because of rats this time, but because the London chill of 1855 would absolutely creep in and gnaw at your ankles if you gave it a chance. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what waking up in that world actually felt like? A world where love letters were audited like business contracts, where a woman's piano skills could outrank her personality, where a gentleman's handwriting mattered almost as much as his earnings, where romance meant proving you were financially stable, morally upright, socially proper, and unlikely to embarrass anyone at dinner. So tonight, we're not storming ships, or marching with armies, or racing through revolutions. We're stepping into drawing rooms, tea tables, stiff collars, tight corsets, and quiet ambitions. We're visiting a time when "Will you marry me?" sounded suspiciously like "May I see your resume?" Breathe in, slow down. Let the past settle around you like a wool blanket in a cold London room. And as we drift gently into 1855, remember, in the Victorian era, love wasn't just an emotion. It was a lifelong contract, negotiated in whispers, lace, and reputation. Let's start our story. Chapter 1. Ella wakes in 1855 London. Imagine waking before the sun has fully risen. Not because you want to, but because the cold knows no mercy and has crept into your bones before your eyes even open. It is London, winter of 1855, and the city is still wrapped in its own breath. Coal smoke drifting in pale plumes over the rooftops, soot settling even on the quiet morning frost. Ella stirs beneath heavy wool blankets, tugging them tighter under her chin. They itch, and they smell faintly of damp stone. Because everything, absolutely everything in this narrow, middle-class boarding house smells of damp stone. That is the fragrance of Victorian comfort when you cannot quite afford servants, but still have pride in your posture, your stockings, and your future prospects. She lies still a moment, listening to the city before it wakes. A distant horse cart rattles over cobblestones, iron shoes clinking rhythmically in the muffled cold. Somewhere below, a kettle whines faintly, competing with the crackle of coal being shoveled into a grate. Not her coal, of course. Coal costs, and every penny must stretch. Her tiny fireplace remains unlit, as it often does. London winters are expensive. She exhales, watching her breath bloom into the air like a ghost. In a century obsessed with appearances, even your breath reminds you that nothing is truly private, not even the warmth leaving your lungs. Ella Laniner rubs her fingertips together, feeling the roughness from laundering lace gloves she cannot yet afford to replace. Gloves, those tiny markers of class, of feminine restraint, of knowing exactly how to hold a teacup so you look like you were born to it, even if you were not. In this world, marriage is not a romantic triumph, but an interview, and dressing the part is half the score. Her future depends not on her dreams or talents, but on her ability to be pleasant, accomplished, agreeable. To play piano just well enough, sew neatly enough, smile softly enough. To be charming, but never bold. Intelligent, but never intimidating. Her mother's voice echoes in her memory. Men hire wives like firms hire clerks. They look for reliability, modesty, and a steady hand. Outside her single frost-kissed pane, dawn nudges itself between chimneys and spires. The city is waking, breathing out warmth in factory smoke, and breathing in ambition from every cramped room like hers. Somewhere across town, wealthier girls are stirring too, but their water will already be warmed, their rooms already swept, their dresses laid out neatly by unseen hands. Ella Laniner rises slowly, wool wraps still clutched around her shoulders, feeling the stone floor's harsh bite through her stockings. She moves like someone careful not to startle the cold into attacking. At a small washstand, she dips fingers into water gone icy overnight. Victorian mornings do not reward hesitation. They require discipline, grit, and a polite smile no matter how numb your fingertips become. She dresses quietly, button after tiny button, marching up her bodice like a regiment. There is no rushing Victorian clothing. It demands patience, posture, and the ability to never slouch, no matter how heavy your thoughts or skirts feel. Soon she will practice her piano scales, recite French phrases that sound elegant and not exactly useful, and prepare herself to be evaluated, not by employers, but by future husbands and their mothers and their expectations. Marriage in this era is a position to be earned, and every breakfast, every polite conversation, every carefully arranged curl is part of the interview. For now, though, she sits at the edge of her neatly made bed, hands folded in her lap, breath visible in the dim light, and waits for the day to fully arrive. And in that quiet, with London rumbling awake outside her tiny frost-ridden window, she clings to one private luxury, a thought unspoken. Perhaps there is more to life than being chosen. Chapter 2. The Morning Grind of Victorian Domestic Life. Ah, the morning rituals of 1855. If you've ever thought waking up during the witching hour with an alarm clock that sounds more annoying than a catfight is tough, just wait until you experience the Victorian equivalent. You awaken in a modest but decently wallpapered bedroom, where the flowers on the walls are the only hint of brightness, and the sunlight is playing hide-and-seek behind gray clouds. Perfect for contemplating deep life choices, like whether or not to boil the leftover cabbage for breakfast. But before you can question your dietary habits, you're greeted by a rather curious sight. Mary, your housemaid, is energetically, and by that I mean she looks like she's wrestling with a small elephant, trying to heft a coal scuttle that looks as if it could contain the entire soot reserves of London. This isn't your average coal scuttle, mind you. No, this one is more black than the heart of a soggy biscuit left out in a rainstorm. Mary, with a shoulder that's favoring her like a bad best friend, kneels in front of the fireplace, which looks about as comforting as a cold fish slap. As she arranges the kindling, tiny sticks aimed at starting a fire that might, if it feels generous, barely warm 2 of your toes. Let's take a moment to imagine Mary's life. Ever wondered what it's like to start your morning with the weight of 100 pounds of coal and the hopes of a family that thinks doing laundry is a romantic getaway? Yeah, it's not. The fireplace itself is a veritable fountain of historical disputes. Every family has their own way of telling a story, and yours is no different. You see, someone says, we are the proud owners of a fireplace that hasn't lit a usable fire since 1842. You wonder how they managed to still hang a stocking by it every Christmas, but that's another mystery for another sleepy evening. Ah, the moment is here. With a few pathetic sparks, which you begin to think might be an optimistic signal for a new career in fireworks, the flames reluctantly make their entrance, flickering like they're auditioning for a role in a melodrama. Mary wipes her brow, standing up with the grace of a heron in a bewildered ballet, looking at you with the exasperated expression of someone who has just been informed that their entire life's work revolves around keeping coal from falling into the soup. If only they could see me now, she might muse, the artist of ash. Ever considered the daily grind of your friendly neighborhood housemaid in the Victorian era? One might think of it as a series of glamorous spa rituals, but let's be real. Cooking, cleaning, and somehow trying to maintain a shred of dignity while picking up after people who believe that perfectly pleated skirts are reason enough to avoid the damp ground. I mean, there are only so many times you can explain that, no, madam, the cabbage and cowslip stew just won't boil itself. And yet, here you are, pondering your own life decisions. While Mary is trapped in the Victorian age, you can simply scroll through Instagram and wonder if posting about your existential dread will get more likes than last week's avocado toast. Spoiler, it won't. Just then, Mary stands up, triumphant. The fire dances and crackles, very pleased with itself as it flickers a little warmth to your waking bones. In this moment, you realize that if you were to dissect the concept of warmth in the Victorian kitchen, it resembles your aunt's hugs during the holidays, slightly awkward, mingled with the scent of burnt toast. Speaking of warmth, You can almost hear someone making their one single cup of breakfast tea in the back rooms. Sounds simple, right? But in the era of loose leaves and dubious thermodynamics, it's much more likely to be a test of patience. You know, maintaining the temperature is like trying to get your relatives to stop talking about politics at Thanksgiving. Impossible, and it generally leads to a boiling point. As the kettle whistles, probably underlining another Victorian custom of passive-aggressive behavior, you think about your day ahead in this world of crinolines and corsets. What does it mean to be a counting house clerk or the lord of your manor? It's a low-grade anxiety cocktail raised to the level of fine art. You consider who'll judge you if you happen to forget to take off your outer coat when entering a room. And here's a modern thought. If marriage were a job interview, what kind of questions would you be asked? Can you produce an excellent cup of tea and mop the floor without destroying your dignity? Or perhaps, how do you feel about never having a weekend off? You might find yourself underqualified, except of course in the art of Netflix, while Mary would entirely be overqualified for life as a TikTok influencer. And as the fire settles, casting soft flickers of light across the room that are vastly more entertaining than anything you could find on your phone at 3 in the morning, you get to experience the absurdity of being trapped in a century where a single sneeze could shift the course of a small family's fate. Just remember, at the end of this Victorian gig, if life hands you coal, well, at least you know in a pinch you can light a fire and throw in a few well-placed jokes to keep everyone warm. The morning has begun, and so has another chapter of your mildly interesting, yet entirely comedic historical journey. Chapter 3. The Corseting Conundrum of Victorian Fashion. So let's talk about a sound that could easily compete with a cat being dragged across a chalkboard, shall we? That's right, the tight squeak of a corset being laced. If you think squeezing into a pair of jeans after a holiday dinner is tough, try doing it with whalebone and cotton, while backed by a guaranteed audience of judgmental ants and the distant echo of societal expectations. As you watch Mary, your trusty housemaid, wrestle with the corset laces, you can't help but think this is honestly the Victorian equivalent of being stuffed into a sausage casing. The garment isn't just squeezing your ribs into a fashionable hourglass silhouette. It's practically putting your internal organs on a Pilates regimen, and the enchantingly precise instructions on how to breathe. Small, shallow breaths only, thank you very much. You'd think you were attempting to maintain your dignity in a game of underwater charades. Not ideal for your future marathon plans. Imagine Mary behind you, pulling the laces with the fervor of someone trying to escape a comically oversized hug. Just one more tug, she says, eyes sparkling with the determination that makes you question if she's been in the business of corset lacing longer than the last war. Each tug sends a new rush of pressure coursing through your midsection, while you internally debate whether this is the real reason so many Victorian women were inventively creative with the tea selections. You're about 3 corset pullaways from developing a deep appreciation for simple sweatpants. Let's add a pinch of historical context, shall we? In the Victorian era, your social standing depended, at least in part, on how tightly your corset fit. Women were required to shift their posture into a delicate yet entirely impractical slouch, as if they were auditioning for a part as a porcelain doll with a deep-seated resentment of its creator. It's like wearing a fancy hat and being told it's essential for your next job interview, except now your ribs are the ones that need to be interviewed, and if they don't pass, they're getting the boot. And the delightful irony? You could be married at any moment. It felt less like love and more like a job offer someone just slipped under your office door while you were making highly stressed decisions about whether to serve mint tea or chamomile. Do you have a passion for fussing over family dramas? Are you equipped to handle unpredictable guests who might put your cooking to the test, all while wearing a corset that seeks to restrict you to a tuxedo-like appearance? Well then, welcome to the lovely world of Victorian matrimony. Picture this, all dressed in an outfit that could double as an architectural marvel. You find yourself at a fetching party, surrounded by an array of your fellow contenders for societal elevation. On one end of the room, you notice Emmeline, standing erect like a newly installed lamppost, and on the other, your cousin Judith, who has opted for the not-so-fabulous lay-of-the-land approach, trying to disguise her discomfort while simultaneously navigating her own corseted limits. It's like an accidental episode of the Great British Bake Off, but the only thing getting baked is the sheer pressure of imminent expectations. And let's be honest, if life were a reality show, who would you pick to be the judge? The voters probably wouldn't be invested in who makes the best pudding. They'd be more concerned with which lady might faint first while trying to maintain the facade of doing just fine, thank you. Ah yes, and today in the Victorian Cup of Survival, we have Lady Arabella versus the daunting challenge of her highly restrictive undergarments. But it's not just the corset squeezing the breath out of you. It's the struggle of trying to remain relevant in conversations that drift between societal gossip and the complexities of last week's knitting bee. Every word has to be savoured, like rare wine, as each utterance can flop harder than a soup biscuit in a swimming pool. Did you hear about Lord Finchmore? Someone whispers conspiratorially, and your ears prick up. Will this be the salacious gossip that electrifies the entire room, or merely another misplaced rumour about his utterly disastrous encounter with a horse? Mary finally finishes lacing you up, and for a moment you hold your breath. Not in the "I forgot how to breathe" way, but the "I've just conquered a mountain of social expectations" way. You see, corsets aren't just garments, they're fortresses. They're the armor women wore into battle for the top spots in social standing, while limiting their very capacity for amusement. It's like going into a circus arena where all the clowns are wearing balloon animals, and you realize you're the main act, except you have to keep a straight face or risk unveiling the depths of your existential dread. Congratulations, you are now reformed into a fashionable Victorian lady, expertly corseted, and ready to navigate an existence marked by sharp-edged politeness and even sharper corset strings. Picture that as a sitcom. How to be Victorian while breathtakingly uncomfortable. The title alone has bestseller written all over it. Knowing that all of this leads to an eventful evening filled with too many teas and unnecessary fanning might serve as an evening comedy in its own right. As your day continues and the pressure mounts, not just from the corset, but also from the social engagement straight ahead. You simultaneously laugh and mourn the absurdity of it all. Underneath layers of cotton and whalebone, the most valuable lesson resides. If those rigid ribs could talk, they'd probably mutter, "Help!" or "Where's a good plate of fried food when you need one?" Life, my dear, in the Victorian era, is mildly interesting, mildly uncomfortable, and entertainingly absurd. Chapter 4. Porridge and Prospectors. Breakfast with the Weatherbees. Let's talk breakfast, an event as thrilling as it sounds, but with a flair that's more reminiscent of a community meeting about toenail fungus than an actual feast. Picture this. You wake up in the year 1855, feeling the excitement buzzing in the air like a swarm of bees at a particularly unfortunate picnic. You shuffle into the dining room, dressed in dark blue wool, which somehow manages to be both appropriately Victorian and wildly stifling. As you plop down at the table, crafted from the expelled spirits of long-gone trees, you notice the main course, bland porridge that could double as wallpaper paste without the adhesive qualities. Why does it taste like sadness? Well, because you're not getting the luxury of flavor, my dear. The Victorian breakfast was as thrilling as watching paint dry, but not the fancy kind, more like the stuff that's been left out in the rain for a week and is now a sad puddle of grey. And there it is, strong tea, sitting there like a tantalizing potion that could either wake you up or send you spiraling into existential doubt. The steam twirls into the air, giving off just a hint of hope, if hope had a slightly burnt aftertaste. You take a tentative sip, pondering your current state of being, the Victorian dating scene, and why society saw fit to serve breakfast that tastes like scraped knees. You can almost hear your mother's voice cut through your breakfast reverie. She sits across from you, fine lines etched around her eyes, like a map guiding you through the treacherous terrain of societal expectations. Ah, mother, the only person who knows how to look concerned while simultaneously telling you all the reasons you need to marry Thomas Weatherby. Not for love, mind you, but because apparently he's got a lovely estate and a rather impressive handlebar mustache. Did you know, she says, her tone a delightful mixture of concern and aspiration, that the Weatherby family is coming for an inspection visit? I hear Thomas cleans his boots every Thursday. A celebration of boot hygiene? This is the news that will surely set the course of your future life. You can almost hear the wedding bells in the distance. No, wait. Those are the sounds of horses whinnying at the thought of being attached to such mediocre prospects. You take another sip of your tea and think, what kind of tall tale could possibly justify this awkward breakfast meeting? This isn't some fanciful version of speed dating. It's more akin to a job interview where the stakes are your long-term happiness, without the benefit of a comfortable corner office and a crazy coffee machine. Do you think someone sat down and asked questions about your skills? Tell me, miss, how do you feel about mediocre weather and mildly disappointing social outings? Do tell. What value do you add to the monotony of domestic life? Getting married in the Weatherby Victorian era felt less like a romantic covenant and more like being selected for an elite club you didn't even apply to. You want to scream, "Sir, I can whip up a splendid batch of biscuits, and I can concoct tea blends that border on medicinal. Why aren't these considered valuable assets?" Yet here you are, grasping a spoon as though it's a weapon of the most ridiculous nature. Can you imagine your mothers-in-law sizing you up with scrutinizing glances of potential? "She looks workable," they'd say, mentally jotting down your flaws on an invisible clipboard, complete with checkboxes. Must be able to endure endless discussions about lacework while looking pleasant even when she secretly desires to conquer the world by trading her spoon for a sword. Oh, and she has to be good at entertaining her future husband's favorite naturalist friends. Suddenly, breakfast feels less like a meal and more like an episode of a terrible reality show, starring you and an audience of family members who are willing to evaluate your potential worth based on how well you fluff pillows and stir porridge. You can almost picture it. Will she blend in with the precariously tucked table linens? And can she wield a tea kettle while laughing gracefully at her husband's terrible puns? With a small sigh, you mentally prepare for the inevitable awkwardness. A dinner table filled with tea-induced giggles at jokes that barely skim the surface of actual humor. You attempt to plan out your conversational strategies like a general preparing for battle. What do I even talk about, you wonder? The weather? It's still miserable. How about the latest in literally the tiniest bit of gossip? But hold on. You fight to keep your spirits up despite the weighty prospect of family inspections looming on the horizon. Perhaps, just maybe, there's hope. You could turn this into a charming chaos while adopting that overused phrase, "Well, at least it can't get any worse." And yet, as the minutes tick by like a torturous clock, your mother continues to chatter away about Thomas's impeccable family name, placing all her bets on his prospects. You silently reflect on the Victorian dream, an endless ceremonial dance of etiquette and illusion, which merely keeps the promise of a brighter day perpetually out of reach. Guess what? If you've ever freaked out over a blind date, you're now on a historical roller coaster where the only guarantee is a chance to fit into an incredibly fancy dress for a gentleman you barely know, all while wearing those over-enthusiastic corsets we discussed before. So here you sit, battling bland porridge with your memories of a yet-to-be glamorous future, fueled by strong tea and a dash of obligatory cheery acceptance. After all, isn't that what life is all about? Mildly interesting, mildly tedious, and absolutely infused with a hint of absurdity. Stay tuned for more Victorian shenanigans as we continue to explore the fascinating, albeit hilarious, nuances of life in this delightful era. Chapter 5, A Delicate Dance, Victorian Etiquette, and the Job Interview for Love. Let's talk about marriage, specifically the art of Victorian courtship, where every glance and flutter of your fan was mapped out like the complicated instructions for assembling an IKEA bookshelf, without the handy visual guide. It's 1855, and you've just spent your morning basking in the fumes of lukewarm porridge, when suddenly your mother kicks off yet another round of her favorite sport, preparing you for marriage. It's less like loving advice, and more like advanced studies in your impending doom wrapped up in a corset. Pick yourself sitting at the dinner table, trying to fathom how to engage in the intricate dance of courtship. The rules are so convoluted, they leave you wondering if you accidentally stumbled onto an episode of Survivor Regency Edition. Your mother, a fine lady who believes she could teach Henry Higgins a thing or two, begins explaining the strict rules of the game. No accepting gifts, no physical contact, not even handshakes. Yes, just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, physical contact is now off the table. You're basically looking at a lifelong celibacy charge that feels more like being a contestant on a very boring chat show. So there you are, expected to charm suitors while simultaneously engaging in a mental gymnastics routine that would make Olympic trainers weep. You must maintain an air of intelligence, but God forbid you contradict the gentleman. It's a delicate lifelong balance, akin to walking a tightrope while juggling flaming hoops, all while wearing a corset. A real-life episode of the Great British Bake Off, but on a much darker canvas, with far fewer cakes and a whole lot more anxiety. As your mother delves deeper into these absurd rules, you can almost hear the gears grinding in your mind. Mother, you want to shout, what if my intelligence contradicts the gentleman's idiocy? How am I supposed to navigate that minefield? Are there scholarships available for this? Ah, and let's not forget the allure of the gentleman himself, the dashing Thomas Weatherby, who may very well look like he walked out of a painting, but is possibly as deep as a puddle in a gravel road. But we're told he has a lovely estate, and we know what that means in Victorian parlance. It's basically a combination of riches and musty wallpaper. Your mother, her features twitching with uncontainable glee, explains, "Thou must dazzle him with your impeccable knowledge of light fabrics and the fervent flutter of your fan. If you impress him, maybe he'll overlook your deep-seated desire to discuss the practicality of using spoons as weaponry during conflicts. In the back of your mind, you wonder if there's a future in which you can marry for love and not just for the sake of boosting someone's estate value. You could always whip up a splendid batch of biscuits, your secret culinary weapon. How about I bake my way into his heart, you muse, but your mother shoots you a look that could curdle milk. Imagine, if you will, your first interaction with Mr. Weatherby. You couldn't help but feel like you were auditioning for some Victorian soap opera. Cue the dramatic music when you forget to flick your sleeve perfectly at the right moment. You open your mouth to speak, and instead of words, a cacophony of jumbled sounds pours out, resembling a hydraulic machine in desperate need of oil. Congratulations! You've just transformed a charming introduction into an awkward performance art piece. However, let's take a moment to admire your mother's relentless optimism, her belief that you'll deliver your finely tuned conversational nuggets about the latest in tea, lacework, and the thrilling new trend in wallpaper. Is there a secret society dedicated to your success in marrying rich gentlemen? If so, you really want your membership card. On days when you're preparing for visits from prospective suitors, your home turns into a stage set. You'll find your mother sweeping like a woman possessed, fluffing pillows as though they're contestants in a beauty pageant. This is important, she insists. You must look like an ethereal vision, an angel of domesticity. And you can't help but think, ethereal? or simply anxious? The angel has a distinctly nervous breakdown vibe, Mother. As the day slips into evening, you mentally prep for your first job interview in the game of marriage, a ludicrous endeavor if history has taught anything. Maybe you've researched all the expected questions, similar to being interviewed by corporate drones. So, miss, how do you handle disagreement while prepping a proper tea? Or, if Mr. Weatherby's estate is riddled with moths, how will you deal with that? Hours tick by, each second feeling like a countdown for a Sunday service that no one wants to attend. What will I wear? Will the family pet be more charming than I? Why must I prioritize folding napkins into swans when he's probably just going to toss them away afterwards? Suddenly, the world of marriage doesn't just feel like an audition. It feels like reality television gone horribly wrong. You can picture yourself in a confessional, dramatically leaning into the camera. The stakes have never felt so high. It's me or the cushions. These thoughts race through your head as you prepare yourself for another visit, another chance to impress a man who might fancy himself a catch. Will he appreciate your observations about nighttime raindrops versus the sound of cricket choruses? Perhaps you could dazzle him with your talent for avoiding awkward silences. After all, who needs a lifelong partner when you can become an entertaining anecdote in your family's yearly Christmas gatherings? So grab your fanciest fan, steel yourself for the dance of etiquette and the absurd delight of Victorian matrimony, and let's see if love, or at least a handsome estate, will allow you to survive this hilarity wrapped in a high-collared disaster. Chapter 6. A Victorian Rhapsody, Poetry, Pomp, and the Perils of Horseback Etiquette. Ah, the Victorian era, where the air was thick with the scent of newly printed poetry and the occasional whiff of horse manure, and no one really knew if they were attending a courtship or a carefully orchestrated circus. Imagine a still afternoon in 1855, as you nestle into your window seat, layered in velvet and lace like a historical cake, ready to indulge in something as soothing as a warm cup of tea, or a soothing backhanded compliment from your mother. Your fingers glide over the pages, and as you lose yourself in the rhythmic levity of poetry, you might momentarily forget the absurdity awaiting you in the world outside. Now, there's a quaint gentleman on horseback rolling by, his hat so high that it practically dwarfs everything else in a 3-mile radius. It's a polite moment, the kind Victorian life mandates. He tops off this trotting spectacle with a flourish, tipping his top hat with all the flair of a juggler performing in a carnival for precisely one loyal audience. You, the well-dressed, highly anxious spectator in your library corner. As you settle deeper into your plush window seat, silk brushing soft against your skin, the outside world seems like a bizarre pantomime, contrasting with the elegant verses dancing in your lap. A horse clip-clops past, its hooves creating a rhythm that sounds eerily familiar, like the beat of an impending heart attack. Did the horse just wink at you? Did that gentleman actually just perform a flawless dismount? Or is this a fever dream you've succumbed to while reading too much Byron? Concerning, certainly, yet oddly delightful. In your modest Victorian sanctuary, the escapades of this well-heeled man provides food for thought. You glance at your poetry book and ponder. If you were to classify your life as a romantic poem, would it have an inspiring tale of adventure? Or would it be an ode to unforeseeable, awkward moments? Like that time you mispronounced persnickety at a tea party, causing everyone to act as if the roof had just caved in. No matter. You read on, letting the sounds of the gentleman's retreat fade into the background. The sunlight filters through the window, warming your layers, wrapping around you like a cozy, albeit claustrophobic hug. And you can't help but think about the gentleman's dash, from the mundane to the extraordinary, the possible conversations unfolding with every courteous nod and breezy compliment exchanged. Yet, one question lingers in your thoughts. Does he even know what awaits him upon considering matrimony? Picture this. He approaches you, heart aflutter, and suddenly you're caught in the web of Victorian expectations. What if, for every whimsical likability, the fact that he has an estate, that's handy, isn't it? There was an expected dose of solemnity. You're left wondering if your role as a wife includes finding ways to leave the room. Every time he insists his favorite subject is the fascinating history of fence paint. But alas, the worry etches itself between the pages of your poetry book, just waiting for the right moment to trip you up. And then there's the whimsical thought. What if the true art of Victorian etiquette was not romance, but simply a never-ending game of charades? What if these courtship rituals were a fantastical production where miscommunication served as the ultimate character arc? Moments where you'd need to feign knowing what the gentleman meant when he raved about the nuances of Pemberley fencing. You would just smile politely, wondering how much longer you could survive a marriage where the highlight of the week was fresh tea leaves and gossip about the neighborhood cats. The gentleman once again prances back into view, causing you to hold your breath, half expecting him to launch into a dramatic soliloquy about his feelings, before circling it back to his estate's garden gnomes. Not to mention this conversation wouldn't actually go anywhere because, let's face it, striking up a romance with a grown adult should really involve more than just strategic placement of furniture and a charming accent. But you? You'd have witty retorts lined up faster than the historian on the best-dressed list. Oh, your estate has gnomes? Fascinating. Mine has an entire cast of confused socks. They perform nightly shows every time the cat gets frisky. Charming exchanges like that might just have you clearly winning the hearts of both gentlemen and ideally the gnomes as well. As you reflect on this, your poetry book, your steadfast companion, opens to a page that tickles your fancy with the tender absurdity of life. With the humorous vigor of a Victorian poet, bemused with courtship, you contemplate what lies ahead. After all, surely navigating the complexities of gentlemanly attention involves the same skills as decoding a particularly intricate crossword puzzle. Equal parts cleverness, an ability to pretend you know what the right angle to approach a hedge means, and understanding that laughter truly is the key to survival. With a comforting sigh, the words of your poetry mingle with the sounds outside, a world bustling with politeness, adorned with tight frock coats and breezy wit. You let your thoughts float away as you surrender to the comforting charm of Victorian life. Thus, you realize that whether marrying for love, to win the gnome competition, or simply to avoid being a Victorian cat lady, you've got this whimsical world down pat, with just enough layers to keep you safe from the social chill of romance. Now, don't you wish life were this delightful dance of manor visits and poetic musings? But remember, it's also fraught with the unending threat of dry conversations about estate management. And in the end, it might just be the absurdity of it all that truly makes this Victorian life a rather mild but interesting detour into history. Chapter 7: Arrivals and Anticipations. Hey guys, welcome back to your cozy corner of mildly interesting history. Tonight, we're diving into a world more layered than a Victorian wedding cake, where spending your life learning to style your hair was considered a career choice, and your marriage proposal was essentially a job interview for the position of wife. Please keep this manor running. It's like filling out a resume, but with more lace, less Wi-Fi, and a significantly higher chance of your suitor mistaking a compliment for a business plan. So, before we get tangled in the floral patterns of 1855 Victorian courtship, why don't you dim the lights? Maybe flick on a fan for ambience, and perhaps a hint of breeze to keep the absurdity of the 19th century from overwhelming you. Get comfortable. Maybe adjust your pillow. Good? Great. Now, let's ponder some pressing questions that might arise when faced with this particular reality. Have you ever wondered if your life choices dictated your hairstyle? Because in Victorian times, if you had the wrong do-up, you might end up single for life. Cue the panic. What if every formal dinner you attended felt like an audition for a Broadway show? You know, minus the confetti and annoying choreography, but with all the awkward glances. Just imagine if your most romantic moment meant merely sitting next to a potential spouse while discussing municipal horticulture. So, do you prefer the hydrant over here or the one by the corner? Now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1855 and it smells like pomade and hopeful romance. Or perhaps that's just the lingering scent of all the failed proposals wafting through the ether. Let's set the scene. At precisely 3 p.m., the Weatherbees arrive at your manor, and not a moment too soon. You almost forgot they were coming, lost amidst your fantasies about pulling off that new dress that kind of looks like someone flung a potted fern onto you. Thomas Weatherby, tall as a Victorian lamppost, emerges from the carriage, his mutton chop whiskers trembling slightly in the afternoon breeze. Those whiskers, typically reserved for dramatic monologues about the Viscount next door or rogue tea pricing, have now become the talk of the town. The golden sheen of his skin, acquired during a sojourn in India, makes you wonder if he might have other exotic stories to share, or if he just really loves sunshine. His bow is brief, but like all things Victorian, exceedingly formal. Direct eye contact is exchanged only momentarily, because staring too long could imply longing, or worse, that you've just exhaled a small cloud of unsavory thoughts about him. Kind of like examining the fragrance of a strongly brewed cup of tea before sipping. Once inside, the full absurdity of Victorian marriage becomes apparent. It's not just a ceremony. It's akin to joining a suburban book club where the topic is the careful balancing of household linens and what to do with leftover cabbage. Picture this. You and Thomas sitting at the drawing room table, surrounded by lace doilies and awkward small talk boundaries, as your mother hovers nearby like an anxious hummingbird. "What do you think of our fine china, Mr. Weatherby?" you might ask, desperately trying to stir the conversation and hoping for a compliment that matters. Little do you know, his mind might be roaming somewhere between deciding whether he should write home about this exquisite porcelain or about your far too vivacious laugh that reminds him of a startled seagull hungry for crumbs. Now let's discuss the matter of etiquette. Ah, the strict codes that bind you like the lacy corset digging into your side. You know the rules. Always maintain a delicate posture. Don't drop your teacup. And for heaven's sake, don't mention that unduly heated debate about the fencing at Pemberley. Such topics could spark scandal that would echo through the halls of the manor for generations, like a particularly stubborn ghost refusing to move on. And just as that thought meanders through your mind, you can't help but wonder, does Mr. Weatherby have dreams beyond surveying his estate? Or is his only ambition at this very moment to survive this tea-infused maze of awkward courtship? He fills the air with cautious flattery. "Your lace is exquisite this afternoon, my lady." "Yes, Thomas, but can you pack a wagon?" And in the blink of an eye, you're yanked back into this peculiar world where each polite smile carries the weight of centuries of expectation. Your daydreams of freedom seem as distant as the moon now, overshadowed by the very serious task at hand. Each word weighs like a small stone on a scales tilted towards social propriety. Yet as the conversation ebbs and flows, a delicate dance of genteel platitudes, you remind yourself that if this is an audition for matrimony, one must hope you both have the same taste in curtain fabric, or at least a mutual understanding of what exactly a suitable tea leaves conversation entails. So, dear listener, as Mr. Weatherby prepares his next turn of phrase and your mother watches intently, the absurdity of it all strikes you. In this grand Victorian scheme, where marriage is as much a business arrangement as it is a love story, you realize one vastly important truth. No matter how meticulously he polished those whiskers, he can't truly handle the complexity of your favorite yarn about historic ball gowns. With that thought, sip your imaginary tea, bask in the comfort of furnished absurdity, and watch as history unfolds at the intersection of social expectation and personal ridiculousness. So there we are, amidst the chaos of polite aspirations and garden gnomes of yore, signing up for life's really long, mildly interesting wait. Trust me, it's more exciting than it sounds. Chapter 8. Tea Time Trysts and the Heat of Bombay. Ah, tea time with the Weatherbys. Picture this. It's 1855, and you're nestled in a drawing room so English it practically drips Earl Grey. The air is thick with the fragrance of brewing tea and the laughter of an era that believed every evening convening required an absurd accessory, be it a mustache, a monocle, or at least one utterly bewildered servant hovering in the background. You might think tea service is just a time to sip from dainty china cups and nibble on crustless sandwiches, but no, dear listener, this is much more. It's a finely orchestrated dance of conversation, a genteel war of words in which each remark carries the weight of your family's status and the potential for future matchmaking. At this very moment, Thomas Weatherby is seated across from you, looking as though he's just emerged from an overly dramatic painting of an Indian bazaar, having unintentionally stolen all the sun and polite eye contact on the way. As temperatures in Bombay climb to levels that would make a chicken fryer feel like a cool, refreshing dip, Thomas subtly loosens his high collar, a move like a Victorian magician revealing his first trick. He leans in, attempting to capture your attention, though you suspect he's really just trying to breathe. Oh, that pesky humidity is hitting harder than the difficult rejection of a last-minute dance partner at a ball. Ah, the warmth of Bombay, he sighs, also reminding you of how far he's traveled to reach this drawing room, by way of the local sauna, apparently. Imagine the sweet scent of spices lingering in the air. Yes, Thomas, but all you can think of is how the warmest thing around seems to be your laughter, which feels a tad out of place when positioned next to the quiet dignity demanded in these tea episodes. The delicate clink of china fills the air as plates rearrange themselves around the table, each one seemingly orchestrated like an impromptu chess game, where the pieces are actually tea cakes and biscuits. You look at the intricacies of the floral pattern on the china and wonder, would it survive the carelessness of a sugar-dusted hand, or your inevitable mishap of accidentally sending it flying into the next room? Fingers crossed. But honestly, any luck today seems to be in short supply, much like your ability to understand Thomas's intriguing description of local flora. He mentions something about bromeliads, his lofty diction momentarily overshadowing how you wish you could simply sip tea and discuss the more pressing matters of the day, such as which manor's windows could use a fresh coat of paint. The language of love is really forged here in the heat of the limelight, or in this case, the sweaty confines of a Victorian drawing room. He speaks eloquently, yet you can't help picturing him drenched in a puddle of sweat beneath all that wool. It's a mesmerizing mix of charm and absurdity, kind of like running into someone at the grocery store in their pajamas. Let's not forget your mother, who stands nearby, practically vibrating with all the social pressure of a wasp at a picnic. Her gaze is sharp enough to slice through overripe fruit, and you'd swear she has a checklist in hand. Converse impressively, it reads. Mention the linen cupboard situation. Don't forget, no one cares if your lace is sublime. Talking about linens indeed sounds thrilling, but here's the kicker. Talking about linens in a world where those would actually dictate your social standing is another game altogether. Well, Mr. Weatherby, you say, trying to sound confident while your own body starts sweating profusely. What do you think about the merits of embroidered linens? Ah, he replies, wiping his brow. The artistry and the discipline required to achieve such perfection. It's a lovely discourse that sparkles with hidden innuendos and perhaps a hint of desperation. Because let's face it, Half the population is probably in a state of semi-meltdown between the pleasantries and well-executed tea etiquette. Thomas's mind must be pivoting through so many topics that it could trigger a mechanical failure at any moment. The sheer pressure of awkwardness hangs thick in the air. It's the kind of layer that sticks to your skin like the last remnants of 5 weddings cancelled due to too much rain. Even the teaspoons seem to feel the weight of the moment, as they've seen many a future marriage proposal simmer to nothing over a heated discussion about china patterns. Did you laugh? You did? Good, because laughter helps ease the tension. It's almost charming, if the charm is a little sweat-stained and choking on sweet nothings. The two of you play this elaborate charade of social pretense, surrounded by ornate floral wallpapers that manage to add just the right amount of pressure to the air. As if they're worried one of you might yell, "I prefer polyester!" And as awkward silences loom, you can't help but think, why aren't we discussing the merits of spiced chai? Or whether the last slice of tea cake should be a sacred duty to share? But alas, this is a world where love moves at a snail's pace, and where the proximity to each other can lead to either sweet affection or unmitigated disaster. Much like trying to explain the rules of cricket to a toddler. So as the sun continues to beat through the drawing room windows, making it feel like you're stuck in an oven designed for ceremonial biscuits, you think, this is what marriage could look like. An endless spectrum of small talk and social intrigue, intertwined with the delicious tension between body heat and impeccable manners. Perhaps there's charm in that. Or perhaps it's just mildly amusing. Either way, history will claim its due. Now, as the cupboard of fate beckons us further into this mildly interesting past, stay close to your imaginary tea. Let the awkwardness wash over you like a warm breeze refusing to cool, and brace yourself for where this curious journey may take us next. Chapter 9. A teacup's tragic fall and the job interview of love. Ah, dear listener, picture this. The gentle clinking of porcelain, the aroma of tea as inviting as a cat curled up in your lap, and just as likely to get knocked off your lap when things go awry. Yes, you've just stepped into the drawing room of a Victorian home, aptly decorated with the sort of elaborate drapery that looks like it was stolen from a Shakespearean set. It's 1855, and like every good Victorian social gathering, it's time for a tea party that feels more like a tension-fueled competition for status rather than a cozy chat with your best friends. Suddenly, an unexpected commotion breaks the delicate atmosphere, like the sound of a goose learning to tap dance. Poor Mrs. Weatherby has inadvertently enlisted her prized teacup into an ill-conceived flight plan. It veers off course at an alarming rate, and just like that, crash! Your heart skips a beat. If teacups were made of fabric, this one would certainly sport the sewing skills of a toddler. But alas, it's fine china, and this one, the very embodiment of Victorian elegance, has hit the floor with a sad little thud that echoes like the judgment of 1,000 angels. Ever so subtly, and I do mean subtly, like spotting Bigfoot from a mile away, Thomas Weatherby's flinch betrays him. He springs into action, his reflexes honed by years of genteel social survival. With all the assurance of a Victorian gentleman determined to save a lady's dignity, he rises to fetch a handkerchief from his breast pocket, the only thing standing between that teacup's shattered ambitions and the looming specter of utter humiliation. Tea, you think, or a handkerchief? And why does someone always have to save their face when someone else drops theirs? You can't help but cringe a little at the whole charade. Victorian marriage proposals had about as much room for genuine emotion as a dollhouse lacking air conditioning. It's all business, my dear, and the failure to secure that fragile china is just another reminder of the stakes here. By now, you can practically hear Ella Lanina, seated quietly in a corner, channeling her inner Sherlock. She's taken meticulous notes on this little scene, filing away the involuntary reactions in the dusty attic of her thoughts. Observe, subtle flinch, a proud display of etiquette, or a nervous tick. She'd be taking mental notes on Thomas's every gesture, marking him for future attention, like a naturalist at a zoo, cataloging the behaviors of rare species. In this habitat, the male species exhibits typical courtship rituals while sweating profusely in wool. Fascinating. The tea party continues on, and each sip feels like a dare to engage in deciphering the endless social codes of the day. You can't help but wonder, does every guest come equipped with an instruction manual for navigating these intricate social waters? Or do they just have to wing it, as any good Victorian would? Interestingly, as you watch the aftermath of the teacup's scandalous fall, you can't help but draw parallels to your own life. Imagine explaining your daily grind to a Victorian observer. You see, I swiped left on a guy who said he just wanted someone to share snacks with, but really, he meant he needed a willing accomplice for his nightly Netflix binges. How quaint. Meanwhile, Thomas jitters nervously. His glance darts between the shattered remnants of porcelain and the judgmentful gaze of Mrs. Weatherby, who is silently calculating how this cup's fate will impact the family's impeccable standing in society. Well, Mrs. Weatherby, you can imagine him saying, one must always consider the implications of China mishaps on the matrimonial market. As he kneels, handkerchief raised like a flag in surrender, the entire room holds its collective breath. The tension is thick enough to slice with a butter knife. Will he be able to salvage the situation? Or will further destruction lead to an unfortunate series of events that could ruin dinner invitations for generations? You're half tempted to start placing bets, but no one here carries change. And wouldn't you know it, Mrs. Weatherby, still regal, finally shrieks in that way that only very proper Victorian ladies can. Think Banshee meets the final whistle at a formal soccer match, and the moment hangs in the air like a bad pun. My dear, what an expensive piece of china. One does not simply have a teacup 1,000 years old without considering one's future prospects. It's at this point that you wish you could somehow intervene. Madam, have you considered perhaps using mugs? They don't shatter quite as easily, and they pair wonderfully with a Netflix binge while you scroll through the last 200 years of men sporting ironic moustaches. But alas, you're just a fly on the wall, watching awkward social interactions unfold like a bad case of the flu at a dance. As the aftershocks of the incident finally start to settle, you glance back at Thomas. Poor guy. You can't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for this delicate dance of courting norms and social expectations. His quest for love has now taken the bizarre form of a high-stakes job interview, where one misstep could lead to a not-so-subtle rejection for the next available matrimony slot. Forget romance. This is about survival, Victorian style. Ah, love in the Victorian era. where a tea party resembles a high-stakes poker game. But that's just how the cookie crumbles, or in this case, shatters. And with that, dear listener, you are left to ponder. Was it just tea, or a carefully concealed emotional minefield? As you drift off into the cozy embrace of slumber, remember this: love can be just as delicate as fine china, especially when you're desperately trying to avoid terrible social faux pas while making a very public cup of tea. Chapter 10: The Hallway Negotiation and the Great Victorian Courtship Debacle. Hey guys, welcome back to another snooze-worthy episode of Mildly Interesting History. Tonight, we venture into the romantic labyrinth of Victorian love, a quest more convoluted than assembling furniture from IKEA without the instruction manual. Ever wondered if courtship in the 1850s felt more like a job interview for a position as a husband than an actual romance? You've come to the right place. So, let's set the stage. Dim those lights, lower than your credit score after Black Friday. Turn on that soothing fan. You know, the one that sounds like a romantic breeze carrying unsent letters from your childhood crush. Get comfortable, because we are diving into the 1850s, where calling on potential soulmates involved masterful social maneuvers reminiscent of a three-dimensional chess game played while balancing a teacup on your head. And let's think. Will you find your beloved's father grumpy like a goose caught mid-sneeze? What kind of entry-level questions might he ask during this delightful meet and greet? How would you handle unexpected livestock emergencies? Or, can you explain why your last term of service ended with a dramatic altercation involving a goat? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1855, where the Victorian era is a waltz through a garden of rigid moralities and courtships that operate under more rules than a game of Monopoly. But don't fret. We'll navigate this perplexing social terrain together. So, imagine yourself standing in the hallway of a grand Victorian home, not unlike a slightly claustrophobic art gallery, but with fewer paintings and more social landmines. Let's paint the scene. You glance into the parlor, where Ella Nina, a lovely specimen of 1850s life and possibly the world's first overanalyzer, can be seen observing closely as Thomas Weatherby nervously fidgets with the lapel of his woolen coat. The air is thick with potential for awkwardness, so thick in fact that you could cut it with a butter knife. If you were to sneeze right now, the lingering silence might shatter like a particularly tense teacup. Thomas, the aspiring suitor, decides it's now or never. He approaches Elelanina's father, who stands there like a human statue, possibly contemplating life's great mysteries, or just how much he regrets offering to host this social event. The hall is pampered with more knickknacks than a thrift store. Porcelain figurines, an impressive selection of hats that one could only assume are for garden parties that never end, and a potent musk that smells faintly of mothballs and unfulfilled dreams. Sir, may I request the privilege of calling on your daughter? Thomas ventures, his voice quivering like a cat trapped in a room full of rocking chairs. Pause here for dramatic effect. You can practically hear the stomachs of every guest turning into nervous knots. Elelanina, watching from her observational perch, thinks, observe, boldness mixed with an unshakable urge to squirm. In that splendid standing frame of man and father, this really does feel like an interview, you might think. If only Elelanina's father had a clipboard and a set of probing questions like, Can you name 3 ways in which you'd protect my daughter from the perils of wild raccoons? Or, on a scale of 1 to horrified, how comfortable are you with the prospect of babysitting my daughter's collection of emotionally needy cats? Thomas is practically sweating through his waistcoat as he explains his totally not desperate ambitions. I believe marriage should be a partnership based on mutual respect and, maybe some level of emotional investment, he stammers, while mentally calculating how many ways he can backtrack should his future father-in-law bring up his childhood pet hamster's untimely demise. Respect, Elena's dad echoes, folding his arms in amusement. What a cozy commodity that is. Let's discuss your earnings. How much would a gentleman such as yourself make on a typical Tuesday? You can't help but snort a chuckle at this historical imbalance. After all, today a romantic partner might ask you about your Netflix subscriptions, or, heaven forbid, that unpaid parking ticket. But in the Victorian era, it was all about fine silks and acceptable financial standing. If you were lucky, you just might get a free pass to the neighborhood social ladder, or a knotted-up family tree. As this conversation unfolds, Elena can barely stifle her laughter behind the doorframe, watching the kind of life decisions go down that make watching paint dry feel exhilarating. Listen, Thomas, she might think, her heart racing as she envisions the epic romance blossoming, or crashing right before her eyes. The stakes are higher than a hot air balloon operator after a double espresso. Sir, if ever there were a way to assure my fidelity, it would involve, drumroll please, a tribute to your unfashionably adorned mustache. Thomas completes his pitch with a flourish that would make even the most emotionally stoic Victorian dame swoon, or roll their eyes, depending on their tolerance for melodrama. All things considered, why worry about love when every interaction feels like it's meant for a stage? The reality is that your chances of true connection might be slimmer than a petticoat left out in the rain. Perhaps reaching for an understanding partner is akin to a visit to the dentist. Uncomfortable, occasionally painful, but ultimately worth it if there's the promise of sweet relief, or a fabulous new top hat at the end. And as the hallway echoes with the earnestness of Thomas's declarations, you might find yourself wondering, does love truly need a formal introduction? Or can love be found in shared absences of porridge and hearty chuckles over farming mishaps on rainy afternoons? So, close your eyes, dear listener, and drift off with this delightful image of courtship negotiations gone awry. Trust that even the most awkward interviews can lead to the best stories. After all, love, like a fine Victorian tea party, may just require a bit of sugar and a whole lot of imaginary patience. Chapter 11. Sweet Peas and Electric Jitters. Ah, the Victorian love scene, a place of propriety, secret glances, and uncomfortably elaborate chaperoning. Tonight, we resume our adventure in 1855, where advances in courtship could be as momentous as the discovery of effective toothpaste. In our previous segment, we witnessed Thomas Weatherby facing what can only be described as an interrogation worthy of a spy thriller. And here you are, bobbing along like a boat on a sea of social expectations that sometimes feels more turbulent than a toddler with a temper tantrum. Picture this. The soft, muffled sounds of the parlor give way to a scene straight out of a painter's fever dream. You are now present for an event as momentous as the first time the muffin was ceremoniously stacked atop the cupcake. Thomas, in a bid to woo the utterly fascinating Elelenena, arrives with a bouquet of sweet peas. Yes, sweet peas. The kind that will not only twinkle under the gaze of a fair lady, but also challenge your sense of romantic gifting. Thomas approaches, clutching those flowers as if they were the last lifeline on a sinking ship. The sun peeked through the lace curtains, a celestial spotlight illuminating the anticipation hanging in the air. You can almost hear the violins playing a melodramatic score to this moment, a score devoid of lute, but abundant in awkwardness. And now, hold your breath as he extends his hand, flowers trembling like a shy squirrel caught in the act of stealing acorns. There's a moment of silence, a heart-stopping, breath-holding silence that could serve as the world's longest pause in conversation. As Elelenena accepts the blooms with gloved fingers, her skin unexpectedly brushes against his. Zing! It's like she's just discovered an unchained roller coaster in a centuries-old theme park, and there's absolutely no one to stop it. Sparks fly. Or maybe it's just the smell of the sweet peas, you think. Those flowers bask in this electric tension, seemingly shameless to be caught in what feels like an unspoken agreement between the two. You might lose yourself wondering if this was how electricity was discovered. Or perhaps it's the thrill of uncharted love territory, filled with more faux pas than a cat in a dog show. Did he just smile awkwardly, you ponder, observing the lovely dance of body language taking place in front of you? Thomas, master of the stutter, seems to defy gravity with the sheer awkwardness exuding from his every pore. His hands, bless his heart, appear to be on the verge of either dropping the precious flowers or conducting an unplanned symphony. What's next? A polite tap dance to demonstrate his commitment? You might smirk internally. Spoiler alert. Victorian men, for the most part, weren't known for their daring rhythm skills, unless it involved dodging potential suitors during a slow waltz. How did we get here? You ask silently, trying to grasp the sheer absurdity in this genteel display. You've unwittingly become a live observer to an emotional exchange that requires decades of etiquette training, more complicated than assembling a jigsaw puzzle with cheese graters as your only tools. And let's not forget the delightful bouquet itself. Sweet peas, once just an innocent flower, now bear witness to this cosmic dance of chivalry and intrigue. Its fragrance mingles with the subtle scent of damp wool coats and something intoxicatingly Victorian, a blend of hope, pressure, and undisputed hilarity that courses through the room. As you watch Thomas try to pull himself out of this socially perilous scenario, he suddenly finds himself speaking on impulse. You know, these are sweet peas. Not quite a Shakespearean sonnet, yet revolutionary enough that it seems as if a choir of angels has quietly gasped in unison out of sheer disbelief. Sweet peas, Elelenena replies delicately, her smile betraying only a hint of bemusement. One could almost say they symbolize the very essence of our fleeting existence. Or, you know, just that you really like vegetables. Nestled in this humor is the very soul of Victorian courtship. A balance of charm and awkwardness. A tempestuous sea where love could capsize in a single misstep. Or, more accurately, a poorly timed joke about turnips. But alas, the moment is mildly interrupted by a gentleman, most likely Elelenena's Uncle Frederick, who strolls in with all the flamboyance of a peacock at a pigeon convention. He clears his throat, the sound echoing like an alarm bell for the socially challenged. "Well, what's this? A flower presentation? Trying to charm my niece, are we?" Imagine the flush on Thomas's cheeks, redder than an English rose in full bloom. He is in a public spectacle now, caught between the sweet peas and awkward dance of expectations as Uncle Frederick bears down on him like a sledgehammer of societal norms. "And how, pray tell, do you plan to provide for her? Can you tell us about your cow's milk production strategy?" You might find yourself snickering at the sheer poetic absurdity of it all. A so-called romantic gift turned promptly into a job interview, armed with the threat of a cow's milk business plan. Because what better way to woo your beloved than with an elaborate casual PowerPoint presentation about sustainable farming practices? And just like that, the sweet peas became both an offering of affection and a gateway to the working class's youthful version of The Bachelor, where selections were made not by compatibility or stars aligned, but by annual yields and the potential for resentment should cooking peas not yield satisfactory results. As this unexpected drama unfolds, you can't help but reflect on the peculiarities of love in a time rife with rigid social norms. And hopefully, you realize you're in for a wild ride through history's courtship meccas. As the sweet peas sit momentarily in Thomas's trembling hands, they encapsulate the humorously complex dance of Victorian romance. And with that delightful thought lingering, it appears you're just getting started. Sleeping might come easy, but participating in this wonderfully twisted love saga will surely keep you smiling through the night. Unless Uncle Frederick comes back. Chapter 12. The Trembling Garden of Vulnerability. Let's talk about gardens. Not the kind brimming with colorful blooms, fragrant herbs, or overly enthusiastic gnomes, but the kind where societal norms blossom like weeds in a neglected yard. Here, in the gentle shade of a Victorian garden, where sunbeams filter through leaves like filtered coffee in a spirited cafe, and with a chaperone annoyingly positioned at a safe distance, Thomas is about to let you peek into his soul. Now, imagine this. The year is 1855, and you're in the midst of London's hustle and bustle. The air is thick with the smell of horse manure, and a unique mix of aspirations and awkwardness. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingles with candid shouts from vendors, hawking everything from bread to more bread, because what good is variety when your stomach is always growling? In a small garden that looks straight out of a postcard from an era that was just waiting for pastel colors to be invented, Thomas Weatherby stands with a bouquet of sweet peas. Yes, sweet peas again. These thoughts of love and romance loom heavier than a boulangerie loaf in a grocery bag. As the sunlight shifts, painting the scene in golden hues, you can almost feel the temperature rising, not just from the warm rays, but from the weight of daily expectations that could suffocate an ox. Considering his current situation, Thomas begins to feel overwhelmed, like a cat caught in a dog park. He stares at his pretty date, Ella Lenina, while trying not to drown in a tidal wave of what the heck is happening here. You could almost hear his thoughts. What am I doing in this fragrant, flowery pit of societal pressure? I haven't even unpacked the emotional baggage from my last awkward encounter, let alone navigated through a courtship rife with sugar-coating and thorns. He thinks back to his home, a small abode where he could relax, surrounded by the comforting embrace of unfulfilling work, dull wallpaper, and the occasional existential crisis. But here he is, the pressure mounting, sweeter than the sweet peas in his hand, and approximately 4 times more suffocating. Have I forgotten how to be even mildly English? He wonders. But what does being English even entail? Is it having a cup of tea and responding to bad news with a stiff upper lip? Or perhaps it's skillfully dodging questions about one's income before being asked to regale tales of your cow's milk production strategy. As he looks into Ella Lenina's eyes, he can't shake the thought of being outclassed by the likes of Uncle Frederick, who surely possesses superior wit, charm, and at least 3 juicy tales about why hotel carpets in the city were once deemed inappropriate for Victorian society. A sudden wave of panic washes over him as he realizes that chaperones seem to have PhDs in judging human interaction. The pressure is so thick you could slice it with a dull spoon. Just then, Ella Lenina gently interrupts his self-deprecating spiral. "So, Thomas," she begins, with a smile that could melt ice caps, "what do you think of our lovely London?" Her question lands like a cannonball at a tea party, and suddenly he feels as though he's been asked to recite Shakespeare while simultaneously doing calculus. Well, it's bustling," he replies, his voice wavering as he stumbles over the word like a toddler learning to walk on a balance beam made of marshmallows. "So many people and sights and the smell." He barely dodges a reference to the horse droppings that punctuate the city's pavement, like nature's annotations on a Victorian manuscript. Ella Lenina raises a brow, an expression that could only be described as a blend between amusement and concern. The smell? Fascinating. Each awkward beat between them feels like an eternity. And in that moment, Thomas wonders, is the ability to navigate this interaction a required skill on a Victorian job application? His mind spirals into humorous thoughts. Would I fill out the form? Reason for applying? To gain lifelong training in the art of pleasantries while dodging judgment from mere mortals. He catches a glimpse of Uncle Frederick, the human embodiment of a stern ruler, lurking just out of view, his sharp gaze like an eagle peering down at its unsuspecting lunch. The man is probably plotting how best to interrogate Thomas over his employment prospects and tightly wrapped financial future in all of 3 seconds flat. Next, Ella Lenina braves the silence. "You're fond of sweet peas, yes? They say they bring about hope. Do you hope for anything?" And just like that, she's plucked him from the shallow waters of nervous banter and flung him into the deep end, wearing a lead vest. He blinks. Hope? What a curious notion, in a place where dinner theatre is predicated on how well one can recite one's bank balance before being escorted to another cup of tea. As he stumbles through his thoughts of hope, hoping not to embarrass himself, hoping to impress Ella Lenina, hoping to survive another moment of this social labyrinth, Thomas finds that he struggles to articulate anything deeper than, "I hope that this conversation goes well." Here he stands, vulnerable, with sweet peas squished firmly in his palm. In that garden, filled with moral guidelines more tangled than a cat's cradle, he feels as if he's on the verge of revealing his greatest secret, or perhaps simply admitting he can't remember the last time he truly felt English. Maybe the real challenge isn't about charming Ella Lanena, but about understanding oneself amidst all the absurdity. And with that thought hanging thickly in the air, much like the ambient tension, he realizes that love, or at least Victorian romantic advances, has become the biggest job interview of his life. And after all that, the poor sweet peas might just have to brace themselves for the fallout of this distinctly awkward garden rendezvous. You can't make this up. Well, unless you're a Victorian poet, in which case the tragedy is just another Tuesday. Chapter 13. The Landau and the Apocalyptic Traffic Jam. Hey guys, welcome back to another fascinating and mildly absurd episode of history that might just lull you to sleep, or at least entertain you more than counting sheep. Tonight, we're diving into a moment so scandalous it makes a Monday morning work meeting feel like a rave. The Victorian marriage market, especially when your romantic prospects are more chaotic than a squirrel on espresso. Picture this. You've somehow traded in your cozy apartment for a rented open landau, a carriage that might as well be a mobile fishbowl for all the fresh air it doesn't provide. You're bumping along cobbled streets in 1855 London, feeling like a contestant on a very questionable game show. What kind of man propped up Aunt Caroline in her forbidding hat? Yes, the one that could probably double as a weapon if necessary. Now, just take a deep breath. Can you smell it? That potent blend of horse manure and vendor calls, screaming prices from the depths of chaos. Ah, nothing says romantic outing quite like the concurrent serenade of cabbies yelling at each other, while dodging street vendors hawking everything from questionable meat pies to flowers that probably had just survived their own existential crisis. You try your best to lean back, but the sticky upholstery welcomes you, like an old friend who just won't leave. The sound of wheels tumbling over the cobblestones is reminiscent of a cacophonous percussion ensemble auditioning for the Catastrophe of the Year award. The landau sways left, sways right. Definitely not the romantic carriage ride you envisioned. More like a ride that's convinced it's auditioning for an extreme sports reality show. You glance at Aunt Caroline through the curtains, and oh, that look she's giving you could curdle cream. It's the kind of stare that says, you better charm that young lady, or risk a fate worse than being forced to embroider a pillow of a cat dressed as Napoleon for the next 5 years. A chilling thought indeed. But let's hit pause there, will we? Now, you might be asking yourself, what exactly qualifies a young woman for marriage in this Victorian marketplace? Is it her ability to weave tales of mysterious intrigue involving her cousin's second husband? Perhaps an impressive aptitude for holding her breath while people critique the size of her dowry? The answer is yes. Yes to all of that, and then some. Because as you ride this increasingly oddly named landau, remember, it's not just about love. It's practically a job interview, where the interviewers are well-meaning relatives, hoping against hope that you don't embarrass them. Yes, their social standing depends on your performance. You better pray you don't accidentally trip over your own historical shoelaces. As the landau rattles on, a jarring thought flits through your mind. Why did we even bother dressing up for this? Dressed to the nines in layers of scratchy fabrics, you feel like a perfectly baked pastry, so well prepared that if someone opened you up, they'd find layers. Layers of societal expectations, familial pressures, and the minute fear of awkwardly stepping on your chaperone's toes while trying to dance. And there's Ella Lenina, sitting next to you, clad in something that could smuggle an entire petting zoo under her voluminous skirts. As the carriage jolts, you can't help but wonder if that pinched expression on her face was flesh and blood, or just a decorative accessory. She seems more elegant than a swan, even if you are astutely aware that if she were any more rigid, an overhead pigeon might mistook her for a statue. You take in the views around you, vibrant street vendors hawking bright fruits and slightly stale cakes, and the raucous crowds flowing like a very confused river. Every shout, every clatter, somehow becomes part of your how to survive Victorian dating strategy. If you can manage a conversation amidst this cacophony, while Aunt Caroline nervously jabs you in the ribs at just the right moment, then you might just earn yourself a spot in budding romance. Picture this. Ella Lenina leans in. "So, what do you think of London's charm?" she asks, as though the air isn't alive with the earthy whiff of hay mixed with street dust. Your brain fizzles momentarily. Charm? This is more chaotic than a particularly dramatic season finale of a soap opera. "Charming," you respond, forcing a grin that feels more like a grimace. "Yes, it's definitely alive, very lively. Like a carnival that's veered spectacularly off course." A bold comparison, no doubt. As she raises an eyebrow, you see the gears in her mind turning, considering if your awkward analogies qualify as a convincing literary technique or sheer lunacy. Your mind races as you think of fanciful yet absurd questions. Will she judge your dimples as potential baby-making assets? What if Aunt Caroline rates your conversational abilities on a scale from awkward potato to flawless phoenix? And what do you even do if someone asks you about your family's cow? You're visualizing this whole interaction as if you're in some kind of period drama with a comedic twist, a play now unfolding in an absurd, hilarious reality, where expectations are thick enough to spread with a butter knife. And about that landau? Well, at this point it's more of a ride on the carousel of social expectations, one that feels perilously bound for a game of musical chairs with no seats left. So buckle up, dear listener, because this venture into 1855 London is only beginning, and whatever comes next, you can be sure it'll be hilariously dysfunctional, in the best Victorian way. Chapter 14. Marvels and Madness Inside the Crystal Palace. Ah, the Crystal Palace, a marvel of iron and glass that rose like a magnificent cake in the middle of London, somehow managing to be both breathtaking and bizarre all at once. As you step inside this glittering wonderland in 1855, the air thickens with the electric buzz of excitement, mingling with the faint scent of oil lamps and an odd hint of damp wool. It's the kind of place that threatens to make even the most stoic Victorian feel a twinge of enthusiasm, or at least to fear for their sanity. You look around and are immediately overwhelmed, not just by the scale of the exhibits, but by the density of the crowds that seem to have formed a human tapestry, almost too colorful for its time. There's a cacophony of voices blending seamlessly with the sounds of clinking glass, the shuffling of feet on polished wood, and the occasional stifled sneeze, quite possibly from an unfortunate soul draped in layers upon layers of itchy fabric. "Welcome to the marvel of our age," Thomas, your ever-enthusiastic guide, exclaims, nearly losing an arm in a rather ambitious gesture of pride. "Isn't it wonderful? Look at those industrial machines," he says, eyes shining like a child discovering candy for the first time. But you squint a little harder, and the machines look strikingly like the tyrannical offspring of a steam engine and a wobbly piece of furniture. Speaking of furniture, you're quite certain you just saw a man in a top hat wrestle with a large contraption that resembles a Victorian version of a blender. He's shouting something about a cucumber juicing machine. This is London, after all, where every gadget seems to promise improvements to one's life, but somehow only leads to more confusion. It's like bringing home a new kitchen appliance and remembering you don't even know how to boil water. But you can't linger on the oddities for too long, because Thomas deftly guides you to a new exhibit: exotic butterflies. It's pivotal, not just because they flutter like living pieces of art, but also because anyone who has seen a butterfly in real life will agree. It's a catwalk of winged elegance, overshadowing the human chaos with their sheer fabulousness. And over here, we have the Nymphalis antiopa, known colloquially as the morning cloak. Thomas beams, pointing dramatically. You step closer, trying to decipher what could possibly be sad about a butterfly that flaunts such vibrant colors. Perhaps it's mourning the loss of its anonymity. But why, dear butterfly, do you wear such a beautiful coat to evoke sorrow? You ponder. Oh, the irony. Only humans could create a monarch out of a grieving insect. As you contemplate, someone nearby wonders loudly if these butterflies would taste better sautéed with a dash of salt. Scanning the crowd, you see a cluster of ladies gasping. They might be appalled, or perhaps they're merely trying to keep their delicate corsets from bursting due to uncontrollable laughter. You're starting to suspect the blend of Victorian etiquette and genuine bewilderment could make for a fantastic new recipe book. Victorian cuisine, a comic tragedy, perhaps. Speaking of culinary wonders, Thomas interjects, redirecting your attention with the grace of a swan trying to swim in a particularly muddy pond. Let's move on to our newest addition, the industrial machinery. Quite revolutionary. He leads you to a section where giant gears are whirring and hissing. Have you ever seen such wonders? He asks with a seriousness that seems almost comical. You're tempted to shout back, "Yes, Thomas. Every time I try to start my sewing machine, this is practically a family reunion." But you keep your chuckle internal as he whistles proudly, as if announcing the birth of a new species. These machines, clunky, hulking marvels of miscalculation. They appear to be part spider, part brick wall, with steam pluming out in every direction like an irritable dragon that has forgotten how to keep its fire to itself. You can almost hear them groaning as they work, each hiss sounding like a disgruntled soul trying to survive Monday morning. Between the butterflies and the bewildering machinery, you're starting to feel like you've fallen into an alternate reality, a version of Victorian life that's somehow more whimsical than you'd ever expected. And as you glance at the crowd, you can't help but consider the sheer absurdity of it all. A gathering of well-dressed folks, oohing and eyeing over butterflies, while behind them, a man appears to be caught in an epic battle of wills, with a gargantuan cogwheel that does not seem particularly cooperative. Are you not just enthralled? Thomas persists, his eyes glimmering with the fervor of a man who clearly believes in the transformative power of gears and glass. Enthralled might be a strong word, more like mildly interested, you consider saying as you try to balance your fascination with the need for a light snack. A piece of bread, perhaps, or something infinitely more Victorian, like a potted plant dressed up as a pâté. Or maybe just an overwhelmed sigh will suffice. And yet, as absurd as it all seems, you can't help but feel a ticket to history unfolding beneath your feet. Here you are, wandering around an industrial fair, surrounded by the weight of history and hilarity, only to realize that despite the chaos, it's a lovely distraction from the stiff expectations of your very own Victorian courtship game. A comedic carnival of concerns, where all you want is to chat up lovely Ella Lanina without worrying about your laundry, or Aunt Caroline lurking in the shadows like a fashion police officer. With each step you take, you're simply one of the curious souls lost in this magnificent mishmash of innovation, aesthetics, and culinary calamities. Somewhere below the dazzling dome, where unforgettable memories might flutter by on the wings of kaleidoscopic chaos. Just don't forget to dodge that cucumber juicer on your way out. You never know when it might want to engage you in lunchtime conversation. It's clear that the Crystal Palace is not just a venue, it's a microcosm of Victorian wonder. As you whirl from exhibit to exhibit, you can't shake the feeling that this is merely an elaborate setup for something hilariously unpredictable about to happen. Buckle up, dear listener. The adventure is only just beginning. Chapter 15. An Unexpected Proposal and the Perils of Scones. Ah, the pleasant hum of afternoon tea in Aunt Caroline's cozy drawing room. Imagine it, floral wallpaper that could make even wallpaper envy blush, draped in hues of lavender and cream, while afternoon sunlight creeps through the lace curtains, creating a soft glow that's ideal for a particularly posh Instagram filter. If only Instagram existed, which it does not, because, alas, it's the middle of the 19th century. You find yourself lounging in a plush chair that feels like it would be more at home in an aristocrat's throne room than it does in Aunt Caroline's modest abode. The furniture, of course, boasts a level of comfort that Victorian engineering deemed acceptable, which is to say, it's a marvel of awkward angles and suspiciously cushioned armrests that are likely filled with ostrich feathers. As you sip tea, an audaciously strong blend that could probably wake a hibernating bear, Aunt Caroline is engrossed, perhaps too engrossed in her own scone, which looks more like a small, perfectly shaped boulder. Seriously, who could possibly consume that dry little monster? But it's the Victorian era, and feats of dietary bravery are required. One must keep up appearances, after all. Thomas, who up until now has been practicing his dashing young gentleman who may or may not be in love demeanor, leans closer to you, his voice slightly shaky, as if he's preparing for a tightrope walk across Aunt Caroline's very stern disapproval. In a conspiratorial whisper, he leans in even further. "I've been thinking," he begins, his eyes wide with a curious blend of excitement and trepidation. Now, if you've ever been in a situation where someone hurls themselves into the deep end of pond of awkwardness, your body instinctively recoils, yet you're equally unable to look away from the inevitable splash. You know the gravity of this moment. What could be so gripping that he felt the need to disrupt Aunt Caroline's tea consumption mid-bite? Perhaps we should consider a more serious partnership, he muses, eyebrows arched like the roofs of those charmingly rickety houses you see along the Thames. A marriage proposal of sorts. You choke on your tea. If Victorian heartbreakers had a mascot, it would be Aunt Caroline's scone, drying out any hopes of a light-hearted romance. Speaking of which, does anyone make light scones? Perhaps there's a local bakery that specializes in non-cement-like pastries. But back to the matter at hand. "Marry me?" you manage to stutter out, your voice teetering precariously between disbelief and the laughter that bubbles closer to the surface. Is this a proposal, or just a particularly bold job interview? What qualifications do you bring to the position, Mr. Thomas? He straightens up, trying to muster the confidence of a man addressing a town hall meeting, while secretly wishing he could melt into the wallpaper. "Well, I possess a vast knowledge of steam engines and a daring love for the Oxford English Dictionary." He should really pitch that to prospective brides. Who doesn't want a man who can detail the many uses of thou? Ah, but can you also lasso a scone from halfway across the room while correctly identifying the Romans' greatest efforts in aqueduct construction? You flash him a smirk as Aunt Caroline's eyebrows shoot up so high they nearly take flight. "Or," Thomas interjects gleefully, "I could demonstrate the art of making engaging conversation without resorting to stale platitudes." You chuckle, appreciating his attempt at humor. Perhaps he truly believes reassurance comes in the form of a well-turned phrase. Flirting with potential suitors during a tea break is a fine art. Two people could easily slip into esoteric fun, or, in Thomas's case, straight into the realm of the absurd. But isn't that what a Victorian marriage proposal should be? Thrilling, a bit wild, and ultimately destined to end with a frown from Aunt Caroline, should you both look too intimately at each other like lost puppies. But there's more. There's always more. Aunt Caroline, who has up until now been trapped in her world of scones and Victorian-level primness, finally interjects, her voice crackling with a mix of intrigue and her well-honed sense of propriety. "Thomas, my dear boy, do you have a proposal?" You bite down a laugh. If marriage is anything like a job interview, what's next? Reading the room? Give them your best 3 strengths and weaknesses spiel. "My weakness is chocolate cake, and my strength lies in my ability to avoid sledding down the Thames during the winter." A fine balance indeed. You can almost see the thought process unfolding in her head. "Why, yes, you're perfectly suited for my niece." as if offering someone up for a jolly old game of familial tennis, where one can score points on character references and your shared love of Victorian machinery. And just like that, the mood shifts. The air grows charged with an intellectually obstructed tension, like a grand romantic novel, only with far more absurdity than Mr. Darcy could muster on his best day. Words begin to tumble out, not just from Thomas, but even Aunt Caroline, who seems to elevate her role from mere spectator to eager matchmaker in a matter of milliseconds. "You simply must consider the benefits of a good alliance, dear," she says, eyes gleaming with the joy of not just watching the world around her, but also claiming potential successes as her own, a serving suggestion for all good matchmaking. And again, your thoughts wander to the scone as you envision Thomas rallying to impress against the tyranny of Aunt Caroline's baking standards, armed only with a good heart and a hope that the pastry hasn't set like cement before him. The villains of your afternoon tea don't seem to be the relentless expectations of Victorian unions, nor the bizarre culinary creations that threaten to choke you. It's simply this: a charming gathering turned into a potential catastrophe of formalities. So, lulled into this most amusing scenario, you sit back, tea in hand, heart in a whirl, while battling the oppressive weight of Aunt Caroline's unsinkable enthusiasm. Who would have thought that amidst the porcelain, plush chairs and reassurance of a certain partnership, a proposal saga could also resemble a well-planned comic opera? Indeed, the universe has a way of delivering humor, even amidst the heaviest proposals. After all, if Victorian marriages are anything like job interviews, to succeed, one must learn to feast on scones and endure the wildest levels of social expectations, all while wearing the kind of coat designed to announce loudly that one is seriously considering their life choices. Delightful, isn't it? Chapter 16. Thunder, Proposals, and the Great Victorian Job Interview. Hey guys, welcome back to the cozy chaos that is mildly interesting history for sleep. Tonight, we'll delve into a thunderstorm so dramatic that it makes your indoor plumbing disputes look like a tea party. Yes, that's right. We're tackling emotionally charged proposals under rollicking thunder, Victorian marriage as a whole, and perhaps most humorously, the unofficial job interview format of the era. Imagine it, rain so heavy it practically sends messages of "you will be very, very wet" to anyone foolish enough to step outside. The windows rattle as if they're auditioning for a role in the town's next ghost story. Dim the lights, settle in, and prepare to have your mind whimsy-washed. But wait, before you drift off into sleep or thoughts of a more comfortable existence, let's ponder some truly essential Victorian questions. Ever wondered what it feels like to propose while a storm rages outside? Or what qualifications it takes to marry someone back in the day? Perhaps the real question is, who decides that the perfect bride comes with a solid understanding of knitting and the ability to bake a scone that doesn't resemble a small geological formation? Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1855, where proposals aren't just romantic gestures. They require strategic planning, a decent understanding of steam engines, and maybe even a scone or two turned into a missile base. It's a bustling Tuesday evening, and our friend Thomas is about to learn exactly how tense such encounters can be. The sky's fury rages on as Thomas barges through Aunt Caroline's creaky antique doors, late and flustered, carrying all the grace of a cat getting caught in a downpour. Thunder booms overhead, echoing his internal panic as he seeks her father, no less. Seriously, you can practically hear his thoughts screaming, "This is the worst time to attempt a proposal." As he crouches to compose himself, his mind flashes back to the parlor, the plush chairs, the ever-looming Aunt Caroline, and of course, the scones that could double as defensive weapons. The atmosphere crackles with the urgency of a situational comedy, where your likable protagonist bumbles his way into an unintended crisis. Let's just call it Victorian slapstick. Can you hear him? The low, serious murmur of voices floats from across the hall, and you strain to catch the undercurrent of urgent negotiation, like a scene directly from a poorly scripted melodrama. Let's hope they're not discussing his future as a potential son-in-law in terms of steamed vegetables, you muse. After all, Victorian marriage is less a romantic union and more a business venture cloaked in veils and lace. Alas for Thomas, this isn't just a romantic whimsy. He's navigating a world where a marriage proposal can feel eerily similar to a job interview, complete with a series of daunting requirements. Who expects a man to present a portfolio just to win the approval of a future father-in-law, you wonder? Did he bring his references? You joke internally. Surely someone can vouch for his scone-slinging abilities. As you listen to the murmurs grow fervent and animated, you wonder what it's like for Thomas, to feel the full weight of societal expectations pounding on him like the relentless rain outside. What must it be like to feel like a servant of romance, rather than an enthusiastic participant? And speaking of perils, have you ever tried discussing your intentions around a father who has perfected the art of evaluating suitors like their livestock for the county fair? The sheer absurdity. You can picture Thomas now, standing there with his metaphorical resume in mind, nervously trying to remember if enthusiastic tea drinker counts as a bullet point. But back to the current calamity. The thunderstorm rages on, providing dramatic ambient sound for this unfolding tension. What's the worst that could happen, you ponder? Only your very romantic storm proposal turns into an epic downpour of chaotic and poorly timed humor. It's almost poetic, really. A tempest conjured by a man contemplating love and the favor of a grumpy patriarch. Just outside the door, Aunt Caroline's voice breaks through the storm's howl as she gracefully attempts to mediate. "But dear Thomas," she chirps, "what exactly do you propose in this career shift, from ardent suitor to family member?" In that moment, you stifle a laugh, picturing poor Thomas delivering a PowerPoint presentation in a language that sounds suspiciously like 19th century engagement management. It's as if he's about to pitch his life plan, involving both wedlock and smocked clothes in one charming swoop. As the night deepens and the rain intensifies, the clouds roll on, reminding you that sometimes life's storms yield the most ridiculous, often messy, yet endearing moments. Suddenly, the tension of wedding proposals takes on a new light. This is merely a theatrical production, a carefully choreographed dance between the absurdity of expectations and the human heart's unfashionable instinct to seize love, despite turbulent environments. So if you think your modern-day endeavors are fraught with pressure and absurdity, Just remember our friend Thomas, who stands soaked in all manners of emotional squall, desperately trying to figure out how to charm both father and potential bride under the weight of familial expectations, and a rapidly approaching thunderstorm, rain-soaked romance, job interviews gone wild. Whatever the case may be, one thing's for sure. It's all part of the Victorian love story, where stakes are high, confusion is abundant, and the only certainty is Aunt Caroline's scone validation committee awaiting you all behind the parlor door. And with that, we find ourselves surrendering to the storm, watching as life's comedy unfolds, one "will you marry me" at a time. Remember, if you ever encounter a thunderstorm, just picture Thomas and know he figured out how to head into the fray, armed with nothing but a hopeful heart and Aunt Caroline's lingering scone aroma. Something no amount of rain can wash away, Chapter 17. The Great Victorian Proposal Pitfall. Hey guys, welcome back to the cozy chaos that is mildly interesting history for sleep. Tonight, we're about to wade deeper into the soggy drama of 1855, where marriage proposals weren't just butterflies and roses, but rather an awkward dance at a family gathering where everyone forgot the lyrics. Picture it. The rain outside is falling faster than your chances of successfully navigating a Victorian romance without tripping over your own sense of decorum. Tonight, we're tackling why your Victorian marriage was like an intense job interview. And let's be real, who wouldn't want to answer the question, "What is your greatest weakness?" while desperately trying to propose? It's like trying to convince your cat to take a bath. Spoiler, it won't end well. So, if you're ready to dive into a wacky world where romance requires not only affection, but multiple qualifications, dim the lights, put on a fan, and snuggle up under your comfiest quilt. Just remember, if you cannot find your partner's resume hidden within your Victorian trunk, you might want to rethink that marriage proposal. Now, ponder this. Have you ever been so nervous that you accidentally spilled tea all over yourself when it was actually served cold? Or wondered if your cooking skills could also serve as a basic survival technique in a dystopian future? Would you be prepared to impress your future in-laws with your mediocre pie crust skills on the first meeting? What if they asked you to demonstrate as part of this job application process? And finally, who deemed massive embarrassment as a romantic initiation rite? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1855, where proposals come with a CV, a blood test, and a healthy dose of familial expectations. Now, let's set the scene. The storm outside sounds like a percussion ensemble with a tin roof, the kind that leaves you wondering if it's raining or if someone decided to hold a rooftop wrestling match. In the sitting room of the Dobbins estate, your friend Thomas is standing awkwardly in front of a fireplace, adorned with all manners of knickknacks that surely have backstories more dramatic than any Victorian romance novel. The ambience is thick with tension, much like a poorly baked soufflé. You can almost hear the fabric rustling as Aunt Caroline eyes the poor lad like a hawk watching a particularly uncoordinated field mouse. She hovers nearby to lend her unsolicited opinions on how not to propose. Honestly, you half expect the poor chap to be evaluated on his ability to draw a 5-point plan for their life together while juggling scones. Just then, the door creaks open, interrupting all laughter and dreams of a romantic evening. In strides her father, looking both triumphant and mildly confused, like a man who just found out his trousers were on inside out during a public speech. "Thomas," he announces with the enthusiasm of a courtroom judge, "it seems young Edward has already granted you permission to pay your addresses to my daughter." The embroidery hoop slips from her fingers, clattering to the floor like a failed rebellion against the strictness of her societal role. The sound echoes in the stunned silence, more jarring than Aunt Caroline's opinions on the perfect avocado toast recipe. Because remember, this is Victorian England, and avocado toast hasn't even made it to the table yet. As thunder crashes for dramatic effect, how convenient, Thomas struggles to recall the 5 essential points he prepared for this momentous occasion. Clutching an imaginary resume, he feels the weight of expectations pressing down like an overly firm grandmother. Did he mention his ability to make jam? Surely it's a solid pro for winning over a prospective family. Better than a resume boasting only skills like good with goats and particularly devoted to tea. Sending furtive glances at the nearby scones, which, let's be honest, look suspiciously like 5-day-old geological samples. Thomas pulls himself together. How is he supposed to compete with Edward's family legacy? Does he need to prove that he could hunt with just a fork and a spoon, all while philosophizing about the nuances of the agricultural revolution? "Ah, your proposal," Aunt Caroline interjects. "Do share, dear Thomas. It might be a jolly good highlight for my simple embroidery project. Because, of course, nothing screams romance like turning your grand declarations of love into a quaint pillow cover." Engulfed in the utterly absurd nature of this moment, you might chuckle as thoughts of, "Why am I even trying?" reverberate across the room. Poor Thomas stands, drenched in rain and nerves, ready to deliver an emotional performance worthy of a stage. But rest assured, dear listener, if you've ever tried to woo someone while drenched from the rain, and multitasking your personal reputation, then you know everything will unfold swiftly, albeit clumsily. Thomas takes a deep breath and begins. "Dearest Ethel, in this momentous hour," and then, "Oh look, everyone! A lightning bolt just struck outside." Because who wouldn't appreciate a good bit of drama during a marriage proposal? And as Ethel stares, mouth agape, Thomas realizes choice of venue is a section that should probably be added to any self-respecting Victorian proposal transcript. As the night carries on, adventures linger over teaspoons and failed attempts, and somewhere, buried beneath the churning emotions and societal pressures, romance finds an amusing face. So, If you think your current relationship expectations are high or absurd, take a moment to appreciate Thomas, who stands heroically beneath thunder's bravado, juggling familial disapproval, rain-soaked socks, and Aunt Caroline's embroidery critique, all at once. And maybe, just maybe, it's worth noting that whether you're navigating Victorian marriage proposals or your next big date night, sometimes embracing the chaos can lead to the most memorable moments. So remember, find your own rhythm amidst the storm, because the scones can always be baked again, and love and laughter typically find a way to bloom, even under the soggiest circumstances. Chapter 18. The Velvet Box Dilemma. So here we are, gathered around the fireplace, and you're watching as Thomas prepares to do the unthinkable. A public marriage proposal in the year 1855, surrounded by family and a fresh batch of existential dread. Can you smell the combination of burnt wood and way too much anxiety? It's almost like the air is thick enough to slice with a butter knife. Thomas, whom we shall now call the brave and perhaps a bit foolish Knight of the Heart, is dressed in his finest black coat, an ensemble more suitable for a funeral than a joyous occasion. But let's face it, asking for someone's hand in marriage felt like a slow march to the gallows back then, especially when Aunt Caroline was on the prowl. Here he is, sliding down to one knee right beside the settee. Yes, they called it a settee, you might murmur with a chuckle, imagining a furniture piece more uncomfortable than a ride on a rickety cart over cobblestones. Inside the settee's deep, gloomy cavity, because who wouldn't want to propose amid the echoes of lost discussions about whether Victorian bathwater could also double as a fine soup? He reveals a velvet box, resplendent, like a glimmering trophy for mediocre life choices. Now, let's ponder for a moment. What would compel a man to commit to a proposal in front of an audience that could rival an episode of The Real Housewives? Do you think he practiced his lines in front of a mirror? Ethel, my dearest, your embroidered samplers bring me great joy. Or perhaps, shall I compare thee to a fine bowl of porridge? You both have that delightful creaminess. And wouldn't it be hilarious if instead of a ring, he accidentally pulled out a wax seal? Or, heaven forbid, Aunt Caroline's old mauve glove from the box? But I digress. As Thomas kneels, he can't help but wonder, does he need a complicated line of reasoning for his choice of gemstone as well? People back then believed a diamond symbolized strength and fidelity. But honestly, a hefty rock was just declarative proof of how many livestock units you could trade. In the minds of many fathers, that summa cum laude 3 generations deep wealth was substantially more attractive than an innovative proposal at the local produce market. Dearest Ethel, he begins, and you can hear him trip over the words like a toddler learning to walk on spaghetti. Will you... What's he going to say? Will you officially make my life a continuous job interview where I'm expected to show up on time? As the tension builds, you can practically taste Ethel's anticipation. And you have to wonder, did she expect a grandiose performance? That she'd swoon and faint into a veil of dramatic flair? Or would she simply mutter something along the lines of, "Oh, is that what this is about? Wasn't sure if you were auditioning for the next local melodrama." Just then, Ethel's gaze shifts from Thomas to the ring, and you can almost hear a collective gasp ripple through the room, like a poorly executed synchronized swimming routine. A modest diamond and pearl ring? Why, Thomas, did you hit the jewelry shop as they were closing for the day? And as he fidgets awkwardly, one can't help but chuckle. The simple act of offering a ring becomes as nerve-wracking as attempting to assemble a piece of IKEA furniture without an instruction manual. You know, sometimes you just toss the pieces together and hope for the best. Meanwhile, Aunt Caroline assesses the scene with the analytical precision of a catapult strategist, her eyes darting between the poor lad and the velvet box. She's probably cataloguing all the ways this proposal could go horribly wrong. Will he accidentally drop the ring? Will he confuse Ethel's name with that of the cow he used to own? The night air is filled with unspoken judgments. But you also notice the comical side of it all. Considering all the works of Austen and the dramas of Shakespeare, haven't they taught us that love should come with a solid on-stage performance? The moment lingers awkwardly, like a waiter hesitant to take your order while you debate whether you want still water or sparkling. Thomas, dear, you can hear him think. If you just drop the ring during the most pivotal moment of your life, you may remind Ethel of her childhood fear of clowns, and that won't be good for your future. As Ethel's hand reaches towards the ring, the whole room seems to collectively hold its breath, as if someone were about to relinquish the ultimate secret that could change history itself. Will she say yes? Or will she suddenly declare that she has a secret life as a professional tap dancer in London? A burst of laughter escapes you as you ponder this absurd version of romance. After all, the ring may signify a lifelong partnership, but the real truth is that every proposal should come with its own set of unexpected shenanigans. Who needs a reality show when you can witness a Victorian marriage proposal with both pearls and peppering of existential chaos? In the end, love in 1855 involved a fair bit of comedy, and let's be honest, a planner's endless checklist. Do I bring chocolates? Do I need a wild speech? Should I have practiced on my pet gerbil instead? And sometimes, just sometimes, navigating through the earnest absurdity of love creates the most humour-soaked memories that last longer than the uneaten scones left in the corner of the sitting room. With love's unpredictability showcasing itself, the weight of the velvet box in Thomas's hand becomes almost secondary to the truth that romance isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's just about wearing your best black coat, hoping for the best, and embracing companionship in the delightful mess that life inevitably throws your way. Ah, Victorian love. It's like trying to dance in a corset. Beautiful in theory, but you're likely to get stuck in a wobble at some point. Chapter 19. the proposal, and the precarious pile of expectations. Let's talk about commitment. Not the kind you might have after binge-watching a series for the 7th time in a row, but the life-altering, slightly terrifying kind. Like asking someone to marry you in front of your family, friends, and that scary aunt who always looks like she's just been stung by a bee. Ah yes, marriage in 1855. It wasn't just a bond. It was more like signing a mortgage that required you to list out every dream, ambition, and valid reason for existence you'd ever had. And yet, here stands our brave knight, Thomas, preparing for the biggest job interview of his life. Now, as he takes Ethel's left hand, his fingers inadvertently warm against her slightly clammy skin, there's a moment of deep silence. Not the cozy silence you'd enjoy while curled up with a good book, but more like the everyone is holding their breath because Aunt Caroline might interject with scintillating thoughts on the benefits of boiled cabbage kind of silence. The world has narrowed to a singular focus on that ring, glinting like a lighthouse in fog, bright, alluring, and possibly leading someone to peril. As the ring slides into position on her 4th finger, the crowd exudes collective confusion, mostly at the sight of Thomas's audacity. Does he really think this is a valid reason to celebrate? They may as well have asked him to start tap dancing on the dining table. Marriage back then was a multifaceted riddle wrapped in societal expectations and sprinkled with a dash of economic strategy. You weren't marrying for love, my dear listener. You were practically signing a corporate merger. So you might wonder, what were the qualifications for a Victorian lady or gentleman? Did they have to submit resumes adorned with flourishes, or perhaps a skill set highlighting the ability to maintain a well-organized tea schedule? Proficient in knitting, expert at avoiding eye contact, and skilled in dodging Aunt Caroline's unsolicited opinions on childbirth. Truly, it was a time where a man had to sell himself like a dubious piece of goods at the local market. Meanwhile, you might consider Ethel's position here. Am I supposed to say yes because I like the color of this ring, or because the entire universe is urging me to comply like a computer glitch? It was almost a deal brokered in whispers, wouldn't you say? Could she politely decline? Oh, dear Thomas, I appreciate your kind offer. However, I'm currently busy planning my dream career as a professional hat maker. Thank you very much. In truth, Thomas's hand is shaking. Not out of nerves, but because he accidentally drank Aunt Caroline's special herbal tea earlier, which, let's just say, was an experience he won't soon forget. Somewhere in the back of his mind, amidst the swirling thoughts of future responsibilities, he's concocting an elaborate exit strategy, imagining various scenarios where he could simply, lose consciousness and wake up somewhere in the roaring 20s. Spoiler, this won't happen. Yet, as the crowd waits, the scene unfolds like an expertly choreographed dance, albeit with some questionable two-left-feet moves. Aunt Caroline, her spectacles perched precariously on the tip of her nose, monitors this tender moment like a hawk eyeing a particularly clueless rabbit. You can almost hear her mental checklist. Is she smiling? Did he remember to compliment her stitching skills from last summer's embroidery club? Did his proposal include a job description and benefits? Now let's shift focus to that ring. Ah, the ring. An object representing endless devotion and countless expectations. Back in those innocent Victorian days, the shiny diamond encapsulated the idea of fidelity and strength, or so they thought. If you ask us today, we might have preferred something a tad more practical, like a perfectly calibrated sundial, or a nice set of walking sticks. Will You Be Mine is filled with so much drama, it could rival a Shakespearean tragedy. Ethel's statement, "Oh, a diamond and pearl ring," catches everyone off guard. It's almost as if she's just revealed that the local laundry also doubles as a time portal. How did you even procure this? Did you prize it from one of the haughty socialites on the corner of Abbey Road? It's easy to picture her looking both amused and bemused, engaging the crowd in a silent battle of wits. You can hear the communal gasp rise around the room. Not the shock at the proposal itself, but rather the sheer realization of the unspoken transactional nature of this situation. The wedding ring was the real-world equivalent of dog food, promising a long-term commitment, with the nagging feeling that for a few moments it would smell ever so slightly fishy. You marvel at the faces in the crowd. There stands old Mr. Thompson, who often declares himself a philosophical expert on why scones always crumble on impact. And lurking in the back, with her arms crossed just enough to be intimidating, is Aunt Caroline, ready to dive into a monologue about the merits of matrimonial harmony being akin to good soup, brewing just right, creamy yet delicate, and keenly aware of the hot gossip simmering on the stovetop. So as Ethel's fingers brush the ring, she's hit by a wave of potential realization. Will this be a lifetime of glorious union, or merely a continuous job interview, where every day requires you to present greater hospitality than a five-star hotel? The stakes have never been this high, or absurd. In this charming yet chaotic world of Victorian matrimony, the seriousness mingles beautifully with the absurdity of expectations. After all, isn't love somewhat similar to trying to bake bread from a medieval cookbook while managing a herd of genetically questionable geese? It's messy. It requires patience, and, if you're savvy, a good sense of humor about the whole endeavor, preferably paired with a side of crumbling scones. And there we have it. The saga unfolds like the tattered pages of an old book you can't resist reading, filled with hiccups, surprises, and a generous sprinkle of historical hilarity. Because, in the end, while commitments were dangerous and relationships were shaped by the strangest of circumstances, nothing could quite prepare you for Ethel's most critical question. If I say yes, will you promise not to eat the last biscuit in a fit of passionate emotion? Ah, yes, love's endless complexities, wrapped snugly in a diamond ring and a questionable marriage proposal. Life in the Victorian era might appear romantic, but remember, behind every flushed cheek and awkward giggle, there's a world of tangled expectations just waiting for the perfect opportunity to trip you up. So, will they strut down the aisle toward the sunny shores of marital bliss? Or will they be swept into a tide of societal repercussions and second-guessing their life choices? One can only hope it all heats up as interestingly as a pot of boiling cabbage. Chapter 20. The first uneventful, unsupervised stroll. Let's talk about unsupervised walks. Not the kind where you meander through a shopping mall, while contemplating whether those shoes truly resemble a medieval torture device, but rather the far more perplexing and socially important kind from the Victorian era, where even a simple stroll felt like a significant diplomatic meeting. Picture it, 1855, where you've just graduated from the engagement phase, and now it's finally time for that glorious moment every Victorian couple has been waiting for, yet dreading. The first unchaperoned walk. It's as if you've just won the lottery, except nobody wants to talk about it, and everyone in your family is anxiously peering out their curtains like they expect a troop of marching llamas to parade past. You step outside with Ethel, the very same Ethel who until recent hours was merely a person with a nice laugh and an almost comforting aura of chaos about her. Now she's the tangible embodiment of every societal expectation, tied up in a ring of questionable heft and adornment. The garden you wander through is bursting with blooms so vibrant they could practically have their own Instagram accounts. It smells like a fragrant blend of roses and mystery, like an accidental perfume that either makes one swoon or triggers a neighborhood sneeze fest. The air is rich with the scent of freshly cut grass, and you can almost hear the faint echoes of nature's wildlife lamenting the absurdity of human interaction. "Can you believe we're out here alone?" you say, your voice a mix of triumph and terror, as if you've just been presented with a surprise gift of a pet spider. "I know," Ethel replies, her eyes wide with excitement, though slightly marred by the memory of Aunt Caroline's eyebrow-raising advice about ventures into unchaperoned realms. It feels exhilarating, doesn't it? Almost like we're bona fide rebels with dark and mysterious pasts. Her words dance around you, swirling in the air like cherry blossoms caught in a rogue breeze. What unspeakable freedom is this? Until now, your every sentence was meticulously crafted, measured by the slightest flicker of judgment from the watching eye of society. Or worse, Aunt Caroline's flinty glare that could freeze the sun. Now you have the strange, unwarranted luxury to say exactly what comes to mind, which could be a delight or an utter disaster, depending on how well you handle awkward social situations. Do you think, you ponder, holding on to the edge of civility, that people in the 18th century went for walks and just talked about riveting topics like the prize carrot crop? Or were they harboring deep secrets, like a distant relation was actually some sort of foreign diplomat? Ethel laughs, her joy cascading like the sound of tinkling bells. I bet all the gossipers were crushed under the weight of their bonnets, spilling the beans like an overcooked stew. Here you are, meandering along in a park that, for all its quaintness, seems to be draped in invisible expectations. There are perfectly manicured hedges, and the sun dapples through the branches like a Victorian artist's brush, creating an ethereal backdrop for your first voyage into free speech. You'd think this would be a moment of magic, and in a certain light it is. But come on, you're both gripped by the shadow of what should we talk about, looming over your heads like a rain cloud that's only interested in dousing the flame of spontaneity. Isn't it astonishing that back in the day, a line like, "What's the weather like?" was actually considered worthwhile conversation, you muse. I mean, could you imagine engaging in such riveting discourse while hoping the man next door doesn't accidentally grow a potato as large as his ego? Ethel snorts, then quickly covers her mouth, glancing around as if to see if society's hawks are swooping down to scold her. I'm sure if we had asked them about their potato endeavors, they would have gone on for hours. Wasn't romance just the most potato-like endeavor of the age? All either party wanted was a good harvest. You chuckle, but then it hits you, not as a steal the biscuit from the tin moment, but more as a creeping realization that this metaphor could define not only your conversation, but your entire lives. As romantic partnerships go, yes, it was a tumultuous field of potato-like endeavors. How many relationships were the equivalent of uprooting an ignored tantrum of tubers, only to discover a long-lost heirloom of deeply concealed grievances? But alas, the moment of epiphany is cut short, as Ethel picks up a dainty flower and examines it. Not with the awe of a collector dating back to the botanical eras, but rather with a sense of gentle ludicrousness that makes you smile. What if flowers had feelings or dreams? Oh, how they must feel browsing through an existential crisis about their place in floral meaning. Quite the poetic jam. Perhaps they conspire to escape the flower pot. You giggle at the thought, imagining a riot of flowers competing to frolic down the street while evading the eyes of passers-by. As sunbeams flood your faces and the gentle breeze nudges at the edges of your attire, you realize just how much absurdity is packed into every little conversation. This isn't just a stroll. It's practically a delightful rebellion against society's constructs. The very act of walking is as audacious as striding into a potato-growing convention with a tiara and a well-fortified statement about abolishing agrarian expectations. Even as you tread carefully into the uncharted waters of unsupervised conversation, you wonder, will you do a good job at this social navigation? Or will the spectre of Aunt Caroline rise from the shadows to influence every whispered sentiment shared between you? In this microcosm of freedom, you find stories waiting to unfold, or perhaps just ridiculous musings floating down the stream of delicate tension like petals in a lake. So you stroll on, hearts warmed, minds racing against the backdrop of Victorian absurdity, and the unspoken realization that this journey, this audacious, unchaperoned walk, is merely the prologue to what will certainly become a humorous chapter in your lives. Chapter 21. The Art of Letter Writing, or Why Pigeons Missed Out on the Victorian Job Market. Congratulations! You've just slipped into the cozy confines of 1855, a year when letters weren't just a way to communicate. They were emotional fortresses. Imagine a time when your thoughts and feelings were carefully penned, not in sterile texts or fleeting social media posts, but in intricate cursive that could have been mistaken for a particularly enthusiastic pasta recipe. Yes, welcome to the world where your every sentiment was housed not in bytes, but in ink, thick, rich ink, that probably had more character than the people writing the letters. Let's talk about letters while we picture our dear Thomas, off on his travels, probably teetering between life-altering decisions about where to hang the portrait of the family cat he definitely forgot to mention in the seaside town's guest ledger. You sit in Kensington, pen in hand, a freshly lifted quill that feels almost as alive as your aspirations for a house that, in your wildest dreams, resembles more of a Pinterest board than a Victorian apartment apartment squeezed between two mostly polite and mildly judgmental neighbors. Now, if you think your last text took too long to send, imagine the Victorian struggle of dialing up a love letter. You're under the house rules of Aunt Gertrude while trying to scribble down your feelings on the topic of, say, your newly acquired Turkish carpets, which were really the talk of the town. Carpets, letters, and perhaps an occasional cat photo. Where's the pigeon delivery service when you need it, right? Oh, sweet Thomas, with your strangely large aspirations, stands at the crossroads of society's skeptical scrutiny about what exactly you'll do with your life. And by you, I mean your love life. Each letter written to him becomes not just communication, but a meticulous job interview disguised as affection. Dear Thomas, you write, what a splendid day it is. Were I a bird, I would fly to the moon and back, or possibly to the bakery, where I hear they're serving delightful pastries that might just distract me from ever having to talk about our hypothetical future together. Every stroke of your quill turns your polite sentiments into unfiltered rants about the neighbors, while simultaneously navigating the minefield of, will Thomas still regard me as a potential wife if I tell him just how much I resent Aunt Gertrude's cat? Not only does writing serve as a comfort by allowing you to express your innermost musings without risking a panic attack in the presence of Aunt Gertie and her habit of severe eyebrow raising, but it accumulates into a volume of secrets, family dramas, and a questionable number of sassy remarks about the state of the local pigeons. And let's face it, that's where the real comedy lies. Have you ever encountered such irritable creatures? They strutted like they owned the place, but you figured were the original keepers of the Victorian job market. The ink flows freely on the page, like an essential elixir of hope and absurdity. Dearest Thomas, the letter continues, as I sit doting on our aspiring home, I can't help but muse about the ideal color for our parlor. Should we select a tone reminiscent of ducks lounging in the pond, or something regal, like toast dipped in the finest honey? Perhaps I could write a letter describing the color scheme of our imaginary abode, sending it off by pigeon, and it might arrive at your doorstep with its own aspirations of being a housewarming gift. You chuckle at the absurdity of pigeon drafts gathering more social capital than any of your proposals ever could. In this undulating sea of societal expectations, your letters become time capsules of every unguarded moment, a veritable revelation of hopes tangled with elaborate disasters waiting to unfold. The perfect recipe for a comedy of errors. Wouldn't you agree? Now, take a moment to imagine the sheer chaos that must ensue when these heartfelt messages were read aloud. What if Thomas, dear creature that he is, took a step too far in his confounded interpretation? Did she mean ducks, or... the musings of a perplexed Victorian gentleman. He might ponder your ducks and honey vision, forever haunted by the tragic ambiguity of avian representations in love letters. Letter writing is more than just strings of eloquence. It's an art form, an opportunity to demonstrate your wisdom, your creativity, and most importantly, your ability to masterfully dodge Aunt Gertrude's nagging about how nice girls don't speak of ducks and honey. And as you scribble away, crafting these delightful missives, The prospect of your potential house in Kensington morphs into this sprawling bastion of joy and confusing decor. In the end, you carefully seal your letter, arguably more art than correspondences, and send it off into the world with more anticipation than any screenplay in modern cinema. What vibes will Thomas pick up? How will he interpret your profound thoughts? Will he picture you as a visionary artist of the impossible, floating amid ducks and honey fabrics? And there it rests, your emotional fortifications layered like an elegantly applied Victorian pleat, awaiting Thomas to crack open and become the centerpiece of your roaming bond draped under Kensington's mystique. Who knew unrequited letters could carry such weight? Meanwhile, you merely hoped that he wouldn't mention too many thoughts about your living room arrangement when you finally chose some fabrics. And hopefully, mundane discussions about evening pigeons could come to a halt. It's darkly entertaining, isn't it? So, as you drift off towards sleep, remember, your great Victorian romance was less about the chase and more about crafting delightful letters filled with the weight of absurdity, awaiting the inevitable quizzical replies of a man, wrestling with the expectations of the age. Chapter 22. A lock of hair, or why your wedding could double as a horse auction. Hey guys, welcome back to the cozy pastel realm of the Victorian era, where your biggest concern isn't just finding a cute pair of shoes, but also ensuring your marriage proposal doesn't feel like you just wandered into a job interview, complete with a panel of stern-faced relatives, awkward small talk, and perhaps an impromptu quiz on how to properly fold a napkin while staring at an unappetizing plate of boiled cabbage. Tonight, we're diving into something softer than Aunt Gertrude's outdated opinions, the sentimental, slightly bizarre tradition of cutting hair as tokens of affection in the run-up to matrimony. But before we tumble down this fascinating rabbit hole, let me ask you a couple of seriously pressing questions. Ever wondered what it feels like to have a lock of your hair cut off by your friend while she giggles maniacally, envisioning it as the highlight of your love life? Or what if, instead of exchanging heartfelt letters, you were relying solely on greasy fingerprints and hastily drawn caricatures to impress your beloved? Move over, Instagram. As you settle in for an interlude of quaint absurdity and mild discomfort, go ahead and adjust those cushions. Dim the lights to a level where you might mistake your living room for a smoky speakeasy, and let your fan blow cool, soothing dreams into your mostly cluttered head. Imagine you're cozied up in your Victorian parlor, the scent of tart plates filled with overly sweetened tea lingering in the air as you ponder the looming nuptials. Congratulations! You've just awakened in 1855, the year when marriages were treated like strategic corporate alliances and love was entirely optional. In this delightful little corner of history, people exchanged flowers, poetry, and, wait for it, a lock of hair as tokens of everlasting affection. Yes, we're absolutely serious, and no, you can't make this up. Nothing screams romance quite like a bundle of cut hair. So, Let's chat about our protagonist, Elelonina, and her best friend Mary, who have their noses deep in the complicated ritual of wedding planning, akin to preparing a souffle with a result that could either elevate you to culinary greatness or plunge you into a cascade of chaotic egg disaster. With 2 weeks to go before the great day, they decided to partake in a custom that could only be described as both sweet and oddly reminiscent of a bizarre high school pledge to never cut your hair again until you've made it big. Like letting your hair define your future instead of sheer hard work. Imagine yourself in the elegantly cluttered parlor, walls painted an ambitious shade of almost lavender, and in the air, if you squint hard enough, you might even catch a whiff of the faint aroma of hope sprinkled across meticulously layered bonnets. Mary giggles while wielding safety scissors like a seasoned hairdresser in a medieval salon. You stand there, perhaps feeling a tad bit like a bemused audience at an impromptu performance of How to Cut Hair in Your Spare Time, waiting to see how this melodrama unfolds. Why would anyone want to give away a precious piece of themselves, you ask? Picture this. Mary's romantic aspirations run wild, and she believes Elelonina's silky dark hair could be the ultimate good luck charm for Thomas. It's just like giving him a piece of my soul, Elelonina quips, sounding ridiculously profound, while leaning into the absurdity of it all. At the very least, it'll make for excellent conversation at the next dinner party. Now, let's fast forward to the dramatic moment where the hare, potentially more sentient than the average cat, rests in Mary's determined hand, poised to be wrapped delicately in tissue paper for Thomas. Have you ever felt like a moment was being blown completely out of proportion? Image Thomas, possibly returning from his noble quest, read grocery shopping, stumbles upon this bizarre token, contemplating why his future bride is gifting him what looks like a pet's unfortunate haircut. Talk about setting the stage for awkward conversations later. It's a height of Victorian humor. My dearest Thomas, don't mind the lock of hair pretending to be a sentimental gift. It actually comes from a mutual friend who, by the way, is equally overzealous in her enthusiasm for our romance. Did you know she once thought polishing her silverware was a sign of her committed coupledom? One can only imagine the look on his face upon receiving such a peculiar offering. Simultaneously flattered and slightly concerned if the lock of hair might suddenly sprout legs and dance away. But fear not. There's more at play here than simple tomfoolery. This charming hair-cutting ritual symbolizes connections far less conventional than what you'd find at your modern-day get-to-know-your-potential in-laws dinner, where you awkwardly chew your food while trying to dodge questions about your plans for the next decade. Instead, this peculiar yet heartwarming token becomes part of their joint story. The hair, forever a part of us, and definitely not the result of a questionable stationary choice. All the while, laughter lingers like a warm, sweet fragrance swirling through the parlor as Elelonina and Mary bask in the delightful absurdity of their traditions. Who would have thought that a mundane act of cutting hair could morph into a monument of hope, life, and that forward-looking optimism we all seek? Even if the hair itself ultimately doesn't replicate in waves of romantic brilliance or happiness. So, dear listener, as your eyelids grow heavy and the tranquility of time envelops you like a Victorian blanket, likely full of mysterious stains. Remember this whimsical tale of a lock of hair, poised to spark passions, and perhaps ignite eye rolls for generations to come. Who knows? Maybe your next loving gesture, which won't involve hair, could very well change the course of your life, or at the very least, provide a hearty chuckle during the next dinner party. Sleep well, dream wildly, but maybe leave the hair cutting to the experts. Chapter 23. When weddings were job interviews, or how to avoid your in-laws with style. Hey guys, welcome back to the delightfully snug and slightly absurd world of the Victorian era. Tonight, we're rolling up our sleeves and diving into the marshmallow fluff of matrimonial traditions, filled with love, lace, and a sprinkle of mild chaos. Picture this: a wedding ceremony that feels more like an intense job interview, complete with a panel of skeptical in-laws critiquing everything from your beautiful vows to your ability to boil the perfect potato. Before you plunge into this enchanting tale, may I ask, have you ever felt the paralyzing anxiety of meeting a future spouse's family, almost as terrifying as a surprise pop quiz on the history of potato farming? Or perhaps you've wished everyone would just chill out about your life choices, while you'd rather be binge-watching that monumental show everyone's raving about. Imagine your in-laws glaring at you, as if you're auditioning for the world's worst reality show. Who will marry my child? So as you adjust your pillows, yes, just that one more wrinkle, and crank up the ceiling fan like it's about to launch you into the heavens, let's set the stage for our whimsical journey. You'll be observing the grandest of ceremonies, steeped in socially awkward exchanges framed beautifully by supercalifragilistic embroidery. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1855, the glorious age where marriages were akin to corporate mergers, and love was that pesky detail you could safely ignore. Just imagine, your nuptial adventure begins with you dressed to the nines in layers of puffy silk and intricate lace, while you struck down an aisle mosaic of breathtaking expectations, yours and everyone else's. You can probably hear the faint hustle and bustle of flustered ladies discussing lace patterns, and the odd sound of a hidden fart from Uncle Eugene. Let's paint a picture, shall we? You're undoubtedly feeling like royalty as you walk down the aisle, confident that the yes on the other end will come with a bouquet of wildflowers and a lifetime of bliss. Yet there's Uncle Vernon, also known as the human lie detector, who's sizing you up like you're a piece of antique furniture. Will you hold up under pressure, or will the force of the family tradition buckle you? Ah yes, there's Thomas, your soon-to-be beloved, beaming as though he'd just discovered chocolate amidst a ban on treats. But wait, what's that ominous sound? Yep, that's your future in-laws chuckling, debating whether your decision to wear white is a sign of purity or just a dreadful fashion mistake left over from last summer's formal wear disaster. You'd think weddings were simply a gathering of enthusiastic attendees, but no. It's like a charity auction where, instead of priceless art, you're bidding for approval, and the celebration of love becomes secondary to the guest list feud over who secures the most flour tortillas for their personal taco night delight. Now imagine this, as you giggle nervously, posing for the obligatory wedding photographs. Your smile is plastered on like an unfortunate house painter accidentally mishandling the colors on a canvas. The truth is, you're secretly praying that your one aunt, The one who insists on critiquing every wedding on television doesn't go all merger analyst on your partnership evaluation. Fascinating union. But tell us, Thomas, are you aware that the average couple doesn't even know how to fold fitted sheets? She might ask, eyeing you both with the careful scrutiny of an HR director's inquiry into job references. You're left hoping your beloved doesn't get flustered, clutching the ring from a particularly ashy cousin as he attempts to cover up his shifty eye movements. And let's not forget about the wedding vows. Ah yes, the time-honored tradition reminiscent of a poorly phrased cover letter aimed at convincing a panel that you indeed are the ideal candidate. I promise to love you, cook for you, and take care of you, as long as you never leave your socks on the floor. Also, please don't fold laundry like you're wrestling with a bear. Can you feel the tension rising like a souffle? Who knew the art of love could sound like a corporate retreat gone rogue? Imagine the looks on the guests when they feel compelled to critique your vision of eternal togetherness. Aunt Marjorie is sitting there, judging your sweet nothings as though they were the latest stock reports, in disbelief that someone could possibly appreciate ad-libbed vows about ninjas and the trials of laundry. And yet somehow, amidst the chaotic whirlwind of expectations, laughter slips between the cracks like sunlight through dusty old shutters. As you gaze into Thomas's warm smile, devoid of parlor decorum, your heart races, realizing that behind the veil of absurdity, this joyous chaos is genuinely yours. So, dear listener, as you nestle into a world where love and family expectations collide with all the finesse of a pie in the face, remember this delightful tale of nuptial anxiety and family shenanigans. Who knew that a wedding could be both the ultimate goal and the ultimate social obstacle course? Drift away and dream sweetly, knowing you may not have to worry about Uncle Vernon's harsh critiques in your next adventure. Just remember, every stitch of lace is worth a laugh, and every awkward silence can be wrapped with personal charm. No fires necessary. Sleep well. Chapter 24. The Peculiar Kiss of Mr. and Mrs. Weatherby. Ah, the moment has arrived. The wedding kiss, brief and chaste, like a polite nod from a distant relative you didn't even know you had. You stand there as a newly minted Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Weatherby, feeling the gentle pressure of his lips, a promise of intimacy lurking just beneath the surface, as though it were hiding from your nosy in-laws, perhaps behind a decorative fern. It's 1855, and you're still blissfully unaware that matrimony in this era is akin to signing a lifetime contract with the world's most complex vending machine. Now, this kiss could hardly be described as steamy, more like lukewarm tea on a chilly Tuesday afternoon, the kind that leaves you wondering if perhaps you should have just opted for the scone instead. The spectators, those well-meaning relatives and friends, watch intently, probably gauging whether your kiss was ever so slightly too enthusiastic, perhaps disapprovingly whispering to each other about the scandalous length of, gasp, the engagement prior to the wedding. How dare you not follow the script? As you both pull away, you have to resist the urge to roll your eyes at Aunt Gertrude, who seems overly invested in whether or not your hand stayed on his shoulder long enough to be declared unseemly. Do you think sheer panic counts as charisma, you wonder? After all, the stakes are sky high, with your entire future hinging not just on love, but on whether or not Thomas knows how to remove stains from a waistcoat. Suddenly, a rush of cotton candy thoughts floats through your mind. You could almost hear the whispers of social expectations. Ah, they're married now. Will they fit into the acceptable upper middle class mold? Do they have enough linen napkins? Is the correctly fashioned candelabra on the dining room table a sign of impending success? It is enough to make one wish for a good old-fashioned panic attack instead of having to keep up appearances. Hold on a moment, though. Let's take a deeper dive into this newlywed bliss, or, shall we say, abyss. The life of married folks in the Victorian era isn't so much a romantic novel, but more akin to participating in a rather awkward game show called Survive Your New Life. Picture this. After the kiss is over and the well-wishing crowd begins to disperse, you find yourselves surrounded by the delightful remnants of two families merging together, likely with enough tension to light an entire town. Every day, you will encounter the fine art of how not to annoy your spouse, as laid out in well-thumbed pamphlets filled with overly serious illustrations of ideal household management. After all, genius homekeeping strategies were de rigueur for every lady, with instructions that, if followed to the letter, might help prevent a catastrophic Sunday dinner. You'll both spend countless evenings sipping tea and discussing vital subjects like the merits of embroidered antimacassars, an essential topic when you have a household to run. Oh, and speaking of running the household, did you know a Victorian marriage usually came with the expectation of children? Yes, children, those adorable miniature chaos agents who increasingly research the fine art of tantrums as they grow. So, Thomas, darling, you might ask, casually stirring your chamomile, how do you feel about living inside a permanently messy playroom? It's the kind of conversation that brings warmth to your heart, if only because you're both simultaneously scared of the prospect. As you go through the motions of married life, don't forget about sartorial splendor. The Victorian wardrobe paraphernalia is less fashion statement and more elaborate engineering project. Imagine buttoning a ridiculous number of fastenings while balancing a ginormous crinoline skirt. It's like trying to complete a Rubik's Cube while riding a unicycle. Surely you won't be judged for losing a finger or two along the way, right? Oh, and those awkward evenings spent with other couples engaged in the sport of deciphering facial expressions. Will they make a connection? Is it possible to like their friends and not become entangled in a lifelong competitive gardening rivalry? That's just the right amount of chaos you never knew you needed. As you snuggle into your maritally approved bed, inside a quaint chamber with flowery wallpaper that seems too cheerful for its own good, you might catch yourself giggling at the absurdity of your new life. Who knew one kiss would initiate a lifetime of muttering polite phrases while contemplating, "What do we want for dinner?" while standing in front of an empty icebox. So now, as the day's celebrations fade away into memory, and the warm glow of gaslights casts whimsical shadows upon the wall, remember that behind every quaint couple celebrating their matrimonial bliss, there's an unseen world filled with laughter, challenges, and the occasional pillow fight over whose turn it is to take out the rubbish. The adventure is just beginning, and who knows, In the grand scheme of things, what better way to commence a life together than with love, laughter, and a dash of mild domestic chaos? Settle in and let the whispers of history lull you into sweet slumber, where you too are living the wildly ridiculous life of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Weatherby. Sleep well. Chapter 25. The Delightful Responsibilities of Mrs. Weatherby. Ah, welcome back, good friend. Shouldn't you be settling into your preferred slumber posture? Tonight, we're diving deeper into our rather amusing Victorian escapade, where you might just find your life resembling a peculiar mix of a job interview and a soap opera, minus the dramatic music and, thankfully, the overabundance of hair gel. Let's talk about a delightful little concept known as marriage. You might think it's about roses, moonlit dances, and candlelit dinners, right? Well, hold on to your crinoline skirts. Picture a scenario where you just signed up for a company and received an extensive 300-page handbook on how to be the perfect spouse. Much of your new life is now dictated not by choice, but by a series of practices that make corporate teamwork look like a beach vacation. Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1855, a year filled with the faint odor of lightly brewed tea and the unsettling knowledge that even the lightest fumble could cost you not just your dignity, but possibly your marriage as well. You're now Mrs. Weatherby, a title that brings with it both pride and the whirlwind of responsibilities. So many responsibilities, in fact, it's as if the universe decided that being a perfect spouse required the organizational skills of a military general coupled with the charm of a Victorian socialite. As you shuffle through your beautifully arranged garden, a place that I assure you took a minimum of 12 hours to perfect every week, you might find solace in the fact that this beauty doesn't simply grow on its own. Oh no, it demands your attention. Much like your husband's endless fascination with the weather report. Are the roses thriving today, dear? He asks earnestly, bypassing a query into how your heart feels after that last conversation about the crumbling economy. Let's explore your daily activities, shall we? Morning begins not with a gentle stretch, but an epic saga of domestic life. First, there's the tea. Oh yes, precious tea, always brewed to perfection, or as close to perfection as you can manage, while wrangling with slightly cranky servants and a stubborn kettle that seems dead set on playing hide-and-seek with boiling water. Did you ever think the act of making tea would require as much vigilance as waiting for a lion to pounce? And while you're working up a fine arm workout with your teapot, don't forget the children. Those peppy little energy sources that surely draw their motivation from springs. One moment they're cheerfully humming about their day, and the next they're turning the parlor into an obstacle course of overturned chairs and misplaced dolls, almost as if they're training for an Olympic event called destruction of household items. Yet despite your best efforts to maintain a sense of decorum, let me remind you of the irrefutable truth. Every husband eventually learns during the inevitable round of parental negotiations. The children possess the unparalleled skill of manipulating adults into mundane trifles. Mama, can I have a cookie? transforms into a decade-long debate over parental permissibility that leaves you questioning your snack ethics. Speaking of ethics and responsibilities, sit back and ponder the perplexing realm of social duties. You find yourself catapulted into a world where garden parties, dinner invitations, and the evaluation of needlepoint skills are the Olympic events of your social calendar. Meeting with other wives means meticulously evaluating each other's needlework. Not because you genuinely care about the aesthetic allure of embroidered flowers, but as a strangely sophisticated means of determining who has the most admirable level of feminine refinement, despite the fact that everyone secretly vilifies their one cousin who's overly enthusiastic about macrame. But the pressure. Conversations are filled with polite remarks and backhanded compliments, so subtle even a magnifying glass couldn't find them. How lovely, dear. That dress is remarkably different, which translates to, what on earth possessed you to wear a potato sack? As you slip into the evening, feel free to reflect on the peculiarities of life as Mrs. Weatherby. Responder to your children's whims while keeping a straight face when one of them declares they want to wear a hat made of flowers at an important social gathering. But bear in mind, your husband will be looking to you to maintain an image of sophistication while battling back the urge to scream into an embroidered pillow. Remember, this isn't just life. It's a charming, albeit chaotic, series of responsibilities served with a side of absurdity. And finally, as the gas lamps flicker, casting delicate shadows across your carefully curated living room, much like that time you discovered a squirrel had nested in your hat, you can laugh at the fine absurdity of it all. Welcome to your new reality. Here, mundane tasks transform into grand adventures, and even while you're juggling endless responsibilities, you find yourself smiling. After all, living as Mrs. Weatherby isn't just about the perfect garden or fulfilling social expectations. It's about the laughter that threads through the chaos, like a friendly ghost in a well-furnished parlor, drinking tea at midnight. So snuggle in and let the peaceful whispers of history lull you into a deep, cozy slumber. While your Victorian self may be busy with endless chores and charming little mishaps, here you are, with a delightful warping of time, drifting off and laughing all the way into the dream-filled night. Sweet dreams, sweet dream. And so, as we leave this curious little corner of the past behind, let's take a moment to breathe, slowly, and remember what we just lived through together. A world of lace and coal smoke, of stiff collars and even stiffer expectations, of breakfasts that tasted like punishment, and courtships that felt more like performance reviews than romance. Victorian life looked elegant from afar, all polished boots and polished manners. But beneath the ribbons, corsets, and tea etiquette, people were just people, trying, enduring, laughing where they could, hoping for small comforts in a world that didn't give them freely. They woke in cold rooms, wore clothing that pinched, smiled politely through doubt, fear, and the occasional emotional crisis caused by cabbage soup. And yet somehow they carried on. The resilience of ordinary souls, quietly doing the math of survival one day at a time, is one of history's great quiet triumphs. No battlefields, no crowns, just everyday courage, tucked into aprons and gloves, and the steady rhythm of tea kettles warming. Tonight, as you lie here in your warm bed with your soft pillow, your cozy blanket, and a thermostat that doesn't require coal, maybe let a little gratitude settle in. For central heating, for breathable clothing, for choosing love instead of interviewing for it, for the small modern comforts that those before us couldn't dream of. Let your breath fall slow and gentle. Let the day soften around you, and let sleep find you the way morning found Elalanina, quietly, patiently, with the promise that tomorrow is another chance to simply live. Good night, friend. Rest well. You made it through your day, just like they did.